Introduction. In the distant dawns of human history, authority was a crude and brutal instrument. Influence was not won through nuance or gentle persuasion, but seized by the edge of a sword and maintained by the unyielding grip of physical might. Rulers and conquerors operated in a world devoid of subtlety, where the projection of fear and the execution of merciless violence were the primary currencies of control. Within this harsh, unyielding landscape, no group found themselves more profoundly disenfranchised than women. Stripped of the physical prowess required to compete on such savage terms, they possessed no obvious arsenal to bend the world to their will to secure their safety or to shape the political and domestic spheres in which they were confined. Yet, a singular vulnerability existed within the armor of the seemingly invincible male, his inexhaustible appetite for physical intimacy. A woman might momentarily toy with this yearning, dangling the promise of satisfaction, but such leverage was inherently fleeting. The moment capitulation occurred, the balance of power instantly reverted to the conqueror. Conversely, should she choose to withhold her favors indefinitely, the man, armed with societal entitlement and physical superiority, could easily seek his pleasures elsewhere or, worse, extract them by force. The power derived from mere physical allure was a fragile, temporary illusion. However, from this bleak and restrictive reality emerged a profound evolution. Driven by an intense hunger for agency and survival, certain women of extraordinary cunning and creative brilliance began to fashion an entirely new paradigm. They engineered a method to invert this dynamic, forging a formidable and enduring mechanism of control. These pioneering architects of influence, figures etched into history and myth like Bathsheba, Helen of Troy, the captivating Shi of China, and the unmatched sovereign of the art, Cleopatra, gave birth to the discipline of seduction. Their method was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It commenced with the deliberate construction of an intoxicating physical presence. Through the meticulous application of adornments and cosmetics, they elevated themselves from mere mortals to living incarnations of the divine. By offering only tantalizing, veiled glimpses of their physical form, they ignited a man's imagination, elevating his craving from a simple biological urge to a desperate yearning to possess an idealized fantasy. Once the trap of fascination was set, these master strategists would draw their targets away from the rigid, aggressive domains of war and statecraft, inviting them into a softer, intoxicating realm defined by opulence, visual splendor, and sensual delight. They might literally embark on voyages, mirroring Cleopatra's legendary procession down the Nile with a spellbound Julius Caesar. Slowly, inexorably, the men would become addicted to these refined pleasures, slipping into the vulnerable delirium of love. It was precisely at this zenith of emotional dependence that the seductress would execute her most devastating maneuver, a sudden pivot to icy indifference. Plunged into a disorienting abyss of withdrawal, the victim, previously accustomed to wielding absolute authority, found himself desperate, emotional, and thoroughly enslaved. Men who commanded empires and armies were reduced to breathless pursuers, willing to sacrifice anything to reclaim the warmth of the goddess who had abruptly turned her back. Through this profound psychological alchemy, women transformed what was once a desperate defense against brutality into an elite, sophisticated art form. Seduction became the ultimate expression of persuasion. It operated not upon the body, but upon the mind, stimulating grand illusions, orchestrating cycles of anticipation and despair, and ultimately securing psychological surrender. The seductress became the master general of a softer, more insidious battlefield. For centuries, this intricate dance remained largely the province of women, with only a handful of male exceptions, such as the Roman poet Ovid or the romantic troubadours of the Middle Ages. But the 17th century heralded a monumental shift. Men, recognizing the profound efficacy of these methods, began to appropriate the feminine strategies of seduction to conquer the resistance of women. The legendary libertines and archetypal figures of that era adopted the mesmerizing use of appearances, occasionally embracing androgynous aesthetics to disarm their targets. Furthermore, they introduced a distinctly masculine weapon to the arsenal, the enchanting power of language. Recognizing a woman's vulnerability to beautifully crafted words, they wove elaborate verbal spells that bypassed rational thought. Simultaneously, the theater of seduction expanded beyond the bedroom. As the rigid hierarchies of feudalism dissolved, ambitious courtiers realized that raw force was no longer viable in the nuanced environments of the royal courts. They adapted the psychological games, the calculated coquetry, and the honeyed language of the seducer to outmaneuver rivals and win the favor of monarchs. This democratization of charm seeped into the arts and high society, where dandies and performers utilized seductive tactics to captivate their audiences. By the 19th century, political titans recognized that the grand orchestration of charisma, spectacle, and theatrical presence could mesmerize the masses, granting them unprecedented authority without the overt deployment of armies. Today, we reside at the apex of this evolutionary journey. In a modern era that officially shuns brute force and coercion, the machinery of influence relies entirely on the subtle, the subliminal, and the persuasive. The architecture of seduction permeates our reality. It breathes through the insidious allure of advertising, the calculated charisma required of modern political leaders, and the glittering, manufactured constellations of the entertainment industry. Yet despite this massive expansion in scope, the fundamental anatomy of seduction remains unchanged. It forever eschews the direct and the forceful. Instead, it wields pleasure as a lure, plays upon the intricate keyboard of human emotion, sows the vital seeds of confusion, and relentlessly pursues the total psychological surrender of its target. Every day, we are bombarded by demands and directives, and our natural instinct is to raise our defenses and shut the world out. Yet, there is a singular state in which our formidable armor crumbles, when we fall in love. In this intoxicated condition, the self-absorption that normally rules our minds evaporates, replaced entirely by the consuming image of the beloved. We behave irrationally, driven by a desperate emotional imperative, until we finally yield to the object of our affection. Seducers are the rare individuals who recognize the monumental power dormant within this process of surrender. They do not leave love to the whims of chance or mystical fate. Rather, they dissect its anatomy. They study the triggers of imagination, the catalysts of enchantment, and the precise mechanics of human vulnerability. They understand that fostering deep emotional attachment is infinitely more potent than sparking a fleeting physical lust. A victim entangled in the webs of love is pliable, easily guided, and deeply dependent, whereas a victim of mere lust is easily sated and prone to wander. Thus, the seducer takes their time, meticulously crafting a bond of enchantment that ensures the eventual physical consummation merely solidifies the chains of psychological servitude. It is a futile exercise to deny the allure of this power, to mask it behind moralistic outrage or feigned disinterest. The revulsion often expressed toward the art of seduction is merely a hysterical veil obscuring a profound, repressed fascination. We have all tasted, however briefly, the intoxicating thrill of holding another's attention, of realizing that our words and gestures have enchanted someone. The desire to command that power at will, to banish social awkwardness and to seamlessly captivate those around us, is an irresistible human yearning. To attain such mastery requires no miraculous physical metamorphosis or fundamental alteration of your moral core. Seduction is a cerebral theater, a game of psychology, not a beauty pageant. It demands only a radical shift in perspective. A true seducer views every human interaction as a potential arena for their art. They do not compartmentalize their lives into moments of charm and moments of mundane reality. Instead, they recognize that an erotic, seductive undercurrent pulses beneath the surface of nearly all human enterprise. By embracing this omnipresent potential, they build an unstoppable momentum. They approach the world with the mindset of a brilliant tactician laying siege to a heavily fortified citadel. The primary objective is penetration, bypassing the target's initial psychological defenses to plant the seeds of fantasy. Once the mind is occupied and the target begins to imagine and obsess, the fortress walls crumble, paving the way for complete physical and emotional surrender. The greatest impediment to mastering this discipline is the romanticized delusion that love is a sacred, unplannable magic. This naive perspective is merely an alibi for laziness. True seduction is an exhibition of immense effort and calculation, demonstrating to the target their supreme worth through the sheer artistry deployed to win them. A seducer operates devoid of self-absorption, directing their gaze entirely outward. To focus inward is to broadcast insecurity, an inherently anti-seductive trait. By actively inhabiting the mind of their target, viewing the world through their unique lens, the seducer gathers the critical intelligence necessary to exploit vulnerabilities and deliver a rare, highly individualized form of attention. They become peddlers of pleasure in a world starved for it, understanding that the promise of being swept away by an overpowering experience is an offer no mortal can truly refuse. Furthermore, they view the theater of life with a sense of playful detachment, refusing to be anchored by the rigid constraints of a single identity. They revel in the fluidity of persona, seamlessly adopting whatever role the moment demands, infusing reality with the intoxicating edge of illusion. Seduction, in its purest form, is a magnificent deception, an amoral game played in the arena of human desire. The forthcoming journey is designed to arm you with the necessary instruments of charm and persuasion, transforming you into an architect of irresistible gravity. It is a comprehensive exploration of the dual nature of seduction. First, a meticulous analysis of the seductive character types, revealing the inherent traits within you that possess the power to captivate. And second, an immersive study of the seductive process itself, detailing the precise maneuvers required to dismantle defenses, orchestrate confusion, and secure total, joyous surrender. Abandon your moralistic reservations, embrace the playful philosophy of the master seducer, and prepare to absorb the intoxicating art of profound psychological conquest. Part 1. The seductive character, the siren. Every human being harbors a latent capacity for attraction, an innate magnetism that can draw others into a powerful thrall. Yet, the vast majority remain oblivious to this internal reservoir of influence. We falsely assume that allure is a mystical endowment granted only to a chosen few or dictated entirely by genetics. In truth, unlocking this potential simply requires us to recognize the specific characteristics within ourselves that naturally stimulate the human imagination, and to deliberately cultivate those dormant traits. The most profound seductions rarely commence with an overt tactical maneuver. Such transparency breeds suspicion. Instead, true psychological conquest is rooted in character. It stems from your ability to project a compelling aura that bypasses rationality and stirs the emotions of your targets. When they are hypnotized by your seductive persona, your subsequent strategies will remain entirely imperceptible. Within the vast theater of human interaction, there exist 9 distinct archetypes of the seducer, along with a 10th figure representing the anti-seducer. Each possesses a defining psychological trait that generates a gravitational pull. By understanding these profiles, you can identify your own dominant shadow, step into its silhouette, and allow it to expand. The journey begins with the most ancient and visceral of these archetypes. We often find ourselves burdened by the rigid roles society imposes upon us. For the modern male, there is an incessant demand to remain responsible, rational, and firmly in control. The siren emerges as the ultimate embodiment of male fantasy precisely because she promises absolute liberation from these oppressive constraints. Within her heightened, sexually charged orbit, a man is transported from the mundane into a realm of intoxicating pleasure. She is inherently dangerous, yet in his feverish pursuit of her, the man is granted the very thing he secretly craves, the permission to lose his formidable self-control. Consider the spectacular entrance of Cleopatra in the year 48 before the Common Era. Exiled by her brother, the young Egyptian queen sought to align herself with the ascending power of Julius Caesar, who was then occupying Alexandria. Knowing the palace was heavily guarded, she orchestrated a daring infiltration. Hidden entirely within a large, rolled-up carpet carried by a lone Greek merchant, she was presented to Caesar as a gift. When the bindings were cut and the carpet unfurled, Cleopatra emerged before the Roman leader, half-clothed, like a goddess rising from the tide. The audacity of her theatricality struck Caesar immediately. Though history notes that her facial features were unexceptional, her physical presence was overwhelming. She possessed an intoxicating musical voice that could enchant the most hardened misogynist. Within hours, Caesar, a man known for treating mistresses as mere diversions from his political ambitions, was utterly spellbound. Cleopatra understood that to hold the attention of a man accustomed to the rigorous challenges of warfare, she had to transform their liaison into an equally exhilarating game. She draped herself in the opulence of the goddess Isis, initiating him into Egyptian decadence, and led him on magnificent voyages down the Nile in a towering, floating temple. Crucially, whenever Caesar began to feel secure in her affection, she would abruptly withdraw, turning inexplicably cold or furious, forcing the conqueror of the world to desperately court her favor once again. Years after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra employed a similar alchemy on Mark Antony. Recognizing his fondness for grand spectacles, she summoned him to Tarsus, making him wait until she finally appeared on a magnificent golden barge with purple sails, posing as Aphrodite, amidst a chorus of nymphs and ethereal music. Antony, a rugged soldier, felt the urge to tame this proud sovereign, but slowly, inexorably, he became her slave. He abandoned his Roman virtues, adopted Egyptian customs, and sacrificed his political survival simply to remain in her intoxicating presence. Cleopatra's legend reveals a profound truth. The siren's power does not emanate from mere physical beauty, but from a brilliant theatricality. A man will inevitably grow weary of a beautiful but static companion. He hungers for dynamic adventure. The siren manufactures this illusion of infinite variety. She masters the visual realm, presenting a larger-than-life, goddess-like facade that commands pursuit. By ensuring he never truly possesses her, she binds him in an unbreakable cycle of desire. While the spectacular variant of this archetype relies on elaborate staging, another manifestation wields a more immediate, visceral power. The future Marilyn Monroe spent her formative years in the bleak environment of Los Angeles orphanages, ignored and unloved. Yet, at 13, a seemingly insignificant incident altered her destiny. Forced to wear a borrowed sweater that was several sizes too small, she suddenly found herself the center of intense male attention. The boys at her school stared at her as if she were a precious treasure. Recognizing the profound leverage her developing body afforded her, the ambitious young woman began to cultivate this magnetism. Years later, struggling to find traction in Hollywood, she secured a minor role simply by demonstrating an improvised walk for a producer, a saunter that perfectly fused Mae West's overt sexuality with a schoolgirl's innocence. Over time, Marilyn transformed her entire physical being into a meticulously tuned instrument. She spent hours perfecting her makeup, artificially creating a glamorous facade. She trained herself to speak in a low, breathy register. Yet, what distinguished her from countless other beautiful women was an underlying psychological wound. Deprived of affection in her youth, she projected a desperate, unconscious need to be loved. This vulnerability radiated alongside her intense physical appeal. Men were simultaneously aroused by her undeniable eroticism and disarmed by her childlike fragility, granting them the satisfying illusion that they were her protectors, even as she entirely controlled the dynamic. The siren is the oldest of seductresses, an archetype mirroring the mythic Aphrodite. In our increasingly sanitized and secure modern world, her appeal is more devastating than ever. The contemporary male lacks the traditional outlets for risk and conquest, the unmapped frontiers, the physical battlefields. Consequently, his repressed aggressive instincts boil beneath the surface. The siren offers an irresistible invitation to the forbidden and the irrational. She proves effective not merely on the rigid soldier, but equally on the intellectual, whose life is often starved of pure, unadulterated physical pleasure. To master this character, one must first forge a presence that is distinct from the masses. A siren is a mythical rarity, a prize to be wrested from competitors. This separation is best achieved through a heightened, almost caricatured femininity that most are too timid to project. Once this visual distinction is established, the siren must deploy two critical elements: the orchestration of a feverish pursuit and the subtle infusion of danger. To compel pursuit, the siren remains an elusive fantasy. She never resembles a common companion who is easily acquired and quickly discarded. She adopts an awe-inspiring, distant persona. As the target expends enormous energy chasing this mirage, he convinces himself that the pursuit is entirely his own idea, blinding him to the profound manipulation at play. The element of danger is equally vital. In Homer's ancient epic, the hero Odysseus binds himself to his ship's mast to safely hear the sirens' voices, knowing that their liquid song promises pure pleasure but guarantees destruction upon the jagged rocks. Modern men are strapped to the masts of their careers and domestic duties. The siren's call is the intoxicating thrill of abandoning the ship. History's great sirens routinely led powerful men to their ruin, yet their victims could not tear themselves away. The siren hints at madness, irrationality, and unpredictable mood swings that keep the target constantly off balance, fostering a healthy fear that prevents him from getting close enough to see the mortal woman behind the myth. Above all, the siren's arsenal is deeply physical, bypassing logical thought to stimulate raw desire. Her voice must be an instrument of insinuation, calm, low, and unhurried, as if she has just awakened from a dream. It must lull the senses and suggest erotic possibilities without ever stating them plainly. Her body and its adornments must dazzle, elevating her to a supernatural realm. Whether invoking the classical drapery of a Pauline Bonaparte or the strategic exposure of a modern muse, the siren uses clothing to create a harmonious spectacle, revealing just enough flesh to ignite the imagination. Finally, her movements must remain languorous and graceful. Like the legendary Chinese beauty Shi, who was trained to glide as if floating across the floor, the siren moves without the frantic pace of the workaday world, exuding an aura of infinite leisure. The essence of this archetype is mirrored in the nature of water. The siren's presence is liquid, fluid, and impossible to grasp. Like the vast ocean, she beckons with the illusion of boundless adventure and fathomless depths. Men willingly forget their pasts and their responsibilities, swimming out further and further until they are entirely submerged in her wake. However, wielding such elemental power carries inherent perils. A woman who projects such intense sexual gravity will inevitably attract the venomous envy of her own sex. The hatred leveled at Cleopatra by the respectable matrons of Rome ultimately contributed to her political downfall. While playing up her childlike vulnerability can sometimes blunt this hostility, the siren must generally accept the animosity of other women as the price of her absolute dominion over men. Furthermore, relying purely on the physical poses a severe threat as the years advance. The intense, unblinking attention of the public can become a psychological prison. The spectacular illusion becomes increasingly difficult to sustain against the ravages of time. A master of this art must prepare for the fading of youth by cultivating intellectual charms and psychological coquetry, transitioning into a figure whose brilliant mind and captivating spirit continue to enchant long after the initial physical dazzle has softened. Part 1. The seductive character. The rake. Throughout history, society has constructed elaborate architectures of morality, obligation, and constraint, placing particularly heavy burdens upon women to uphold virtue and domestic order. The daily reality of this existence is often one of quiet compromise and emotional rationing. Enter a figure who shatters this tranquilized state entirely, a man whose desire is so absolute, so consuming, that it obliterates all rational thought and social boundaries. This first manifestation of the archetype operates through sheer, overwhelming devotion. When he fixes his gaze upon his target, she becomes the absolute center of his universe. He does not offer a cautious, measured affection. He offers an intoxicating, desperate worship. In a world where men are often distracted by ambition, status, or their own egos, a man who is entirely, recklessly enslaved to the immediate presence of a woman offers a powerful validation. His burning fixation bypasses her logical defenses because it speaks to a deep, unvoiced fantasy, the desire to be so overwhelmingly beautiful and compelling that a man would sacrifice everything simply to possess her. He is a master of the present moment, utilizing eloquent, breathless words to weave a reality where only the two of them exist, making the prospect of yielding feel not like a surrender, but like a magnificent, shared madness. Yet there is a secondary, much darker manifestation of this archetype, one that taps into the most primal and repressed chambers of the human psyche. Beneath the veneer of civilized life lies a silent rebellion against the rules of propriety. The dark, scandalous figure offers the ultimate thrill of transgression. His reputation precedes him. He is known to be dangerous, unfaithful, and a ruinous force. Paradoxically, this infamy is his greatest weapon. To be chosen by him is to be invited into the heart of the forbidden. The target knows he is a scoundrel, but she believes that her unique allure might be the singular force capable of taming him, or at the very least, she is willing to risk societal ruin for the sheer exhilaration of his chaotic embrace. He represents the intoxicating release of the shadow self, a temporary escape from the suffocating demands of a perfectly ordered life. He does not apologize for his dark nature, he flaunts it, drawing in those who secretly yearn to touch the flame. To cultivate the profound gravitational pull of this character, one must master the art of uninhibited expression and strategic vulnerability. The true master of this path is not necessarily physically flawless, rather his power lies in his absolute lack of hesitation and his supreme command of language. Words are his most potent instrument. He understands that a woman's imagination is deeply stimulated by what she hears, by the poetic, passionate declarations that elevate an ordinary encounter into a sweeping romance. He writes letters, he whispers secrets, he utilizes rhetoric not to convey facts, but to orchestrate emotion. Furthermore, he possesses a brilliant, disarming flaw. He openly admits to being helplessly weak in the face of female beauty. By confessing that he cannot control himself, he removes the threat of predatory aggression and replaces it with the flattering illusion that the woman herself is wielding the ultimate power. He demonstrates a willingness to abandon his own dignity, to face public scorn, and to risk his own destruction for the sake of his pursuit, proving that his desire is gloriously authentic. The essence of this captivating and destructive force is perfectly mirrored in the nature of fire. It is a terrifying element, yet entirely hypnotic. It consumes everything it touches without discrimination, burning with a ferocious, chaotic heat. People are naturally drawn to its warmth and its mesmerizing dance, willingly inching closer to the danger, ignoring the rational fear of being burned for the sake of feeling its intense, radiating heat in the coldness of an ordinary world. However, a life lived with such volatile intensity carries profound and inevitable consequences. A fire cannot burn forever without eventually consuming itself or drawing the effort of those determined to extinguish it. The man who operates as an unrepentant seducer leaves a trail of emotional wreckage, and the very women who once adored him may transform into formidable enemies when the intoxicating spell inevitably breaks. Moreover, society as a whole inherently despises this figure because he threatens the foundational institutions of fidelity, marriage, and social stability. His existence is an affront to the established order. As age strips away the vitality required to sustain this relentless, dramatic lifestyle, he risks becoming a pathetic figure, hunted by his past and despised by the community he so freely disrupted. The path is exhilarating, but it is perpetually stalked by the spectre of isolation and ruin. Part 1. The seductive character. The ideal lover. Most individuals carry with them a set of youthful dreams and lofty aspirations that inevitably suffer the friction of time and harsh reality. The world frequently fails to match these early visions, leaving a residue of disillusionment. The ideal lover steps into this chasm of disappointment, serving as a flawless mirror that reflects a person's deepest, unfulfilled fantasies. Whether the yearning is for chivalric romance, grand adventure, or a profound spiritual communion, this archetype possesses the artistry to craft the precise illusion required. In an existence often marred by disenchantment and baseness, adopting the persona of the ideal lover grants unparalleled psychological power. The romantic ideal. We begin in the autumn of 1760 at a grand opera in Cologne, where a striking young woman sat beside her amiable but profoundly unexciting husband, the city's burgomaster. From her vantage point, she caught sight of a resplendently dressed gentleman. This man was Giovanni Giacomo Casanova. After the performance, he introduced himself with a graceful declaration, expressing the audacious hope that she would grant him every dance at an upcoming ball. The woman was instantly captivated. Casanova possessed an uncanny ability to anticipate her unspoken desires. During a subsequent visit to her home, he learned of a hidden chapel adjacent to her chambers. With an innocent demeanor, he contrived to hide in the chapel's cramped confessional for an entire day, enduring rats and severe discomfort merely for the promise of a midnight rendezvous. The tryst that followed infused the bored wife's life with thrilling adventure. The very sacrilege of the setting intensified her delight. When Casanova ultimately vanished from her life, he left gracefully, cementing his image as the perfect, fleeting romance. Years later in London, Casanova answered a newspaper advertisement placed by Miss Pauline, a young noblewoman from Portugal. Having eloped and subsequently been left alone in a foreign city with dwindling funds, she was isolated and despondent. Casanova offered her a room, asking only for her refined companionship. He did not act the predator. Instead, he engaged her in chess, horseback riding, and elevated literary discussions. He played the consummate gentleman, fulfilling her desperate need for intellectual and social validation. When he eventually confessed his love, she initially resisted, citing her devotion to her absent lover, yet following a calculated accident where he fell from his horse, her overwhelming sympathy shattered her defenses, leading to a passionate but strictly temporary affair that ended in enduring friendship rather than bitter abandonment. In another instance, in a Spanish town, Casanova encountered Ignacia, a beautiful, devout girl constrained by a dull existence and a strict fiancé. Casanova enchanted her with his dancing and his bold declarations of love. Recognizing that her life lacked torment and the thrill of genuine transgression, he orchestrated situations that sparked her jealousy, introducing a flirtatious duchess to unbalance her. Ignacia, starved for true emotional turmoil, finally defied her confessor, deciding to plunge into sin and passion for the duration of Casanova's stay. Casanova stands as a paragon of this archetype. His genius lay not in a singular method, but in his profound observational skills. He studied his targets, intuitively grasped what their lives lacked, and seamlessly transformed himself into the embodiment of that missing element. For the burgomaster's wife, he was the daring adventurer. For Miss Pauline, the noble intellectual companion. For Ignatia, the catalyst for necessary suffering and sin. He did not merely seduce them, he materialized their fantasies, rendering himself indispensable before orchestrating a masterful exit, the beauty ideal. In 1730, a fortune-teller made an absurd prophecy regarding a 9-year-old middle-class girl named Jeanne Poisson. She would one day claim the heart of King Louis XV. Despite the rigid aristocratic traditions governing royal mistresses, Jeanne's mother cultivated the girl's potential, securing her an education typically reserved for noblemen. Jeanne mastered music, riding, and the sophisticated art of conversation. Upon marrying into the lower nobility and becoming Madame d'Etiolles, she established a vibrant literary salon, befriending luminaries like Voltaire. Yet she never abandoned the childhood prophecy. Utilizing her husband's estate, which bordered the king's hunting grounds, she orchestrated accidental encounters, always appearing in breathtaking, evocative attire. Louis XV, a monarch notoriously plagued by chronic boredom and a fleeting attention span for women, was soon utterly dazzled. Defying all courtly precedent, he elevated this middle-class woman to the title of Marquise de Pompadour and installed her as his official mistress. The court assumed her reign would be brief, a mere novelty. They profoundly underestimated her genius. Madame de Pompadour understood that a ruler possessing everything is the most difficult creature to keep entertained. To counter the king's malaise, she transformed his visits into enchanting sensory experiences. Her chambers were always warm and filled with exquisite fragrances. She wore a constantly rotating wardrobe of startlingly beautiful costumes. She engaged him in witty, substantive dialogue, sang flawlessly, and even proposed architectural and artistic projects to occupy his mind. Most brilliantly, she constructed a private theatre at Versailles, directing and starring in productions that became the king's absolute obsession. Louis XV had been trained to succeed the magnificent Sun King, Louis XIV, a task that left him burdened with a profound inferiority complex. His previous mistresses had appealed solely to his baser physical appetites. Madame de Pompadour, however, mirrored his buried aspirations for greatness. By immersing him in high culture and making him a great patron of the arts, she elevated him. She held up a mirror that reflected not a bored, sensualist monarch, but a refined and visionary leader. Through this profound aesthetic and spiritual validation, she maintained absolute dominion over both the king and the French court for 2 decades. Keys to the character. Within every individual lies a dormant ideal, a vision of what we wish to become or the flawless counterpart we long to possess. These ideals are often forged in our earliest years, born from deprivations or overabundances. We may crave the danger we were shielded from, or we may seek the noble, exalted existence our mundane lives deny us. When another person appears to embody this missing piece, or proves capable of drawing out our own buried greatness, we are helpless to resist. We project our deepest yearnings onto them, doing the heavy lifting of the seduction ourselves. To master the path of the ideal lover, you must become an unparalleled observer. Disregard what people say consciously. Instead, read their gestures, their tone, the fleeting expressions that betray their hidden disappointments. Often, their true ideal lies in direct opposition to their outward behavior. A man who seemingly chases only shallow pleasures may secretly hunger for a partner who flatters his intellect and latent nobility. The modern era is uniquely susceptible to this form of seduction. We inhabit a world where raw power and manipulation are culturally taboo. The ideal lover conceals the mechanics of power behind a facade of aesthetic elevation and spiritual grace. By appealing to the higher self, you disguise the earthly reality of your conquest, making the surrender feel like a divine ascension rather than a defeat. Consider the ancient archetype of the chivalric knight. The medieval troubadour offered absolute, unwavering devotion, enduring immense trials and physical suffering for the sake of his lady. He elevated courtship above the crass realms of politics and commerce, transforming it into a purely aesthetic and spiritual dedication. Such absolute focus is a rarity, immensely flattering to the target's vanity. Historical figures like Sergei Saltykov, who braved the lethal wrath of the Russian court to court the isolated Grand Duchess Catherine, or Rudolph Valentino, whose cinematic image popularized a patient, detail-oriented, and exquisitely attentive courtship, drew upon this powerful chivalric ideal. They demonstrated that making a romantic pursuit feel like a timeless, poetic ritual is devastatingly effective. Conversely, men often harbor the paradoxical ideal of the Madonna whore, a figure blending pure spiritual innocence with raw, sensual knowledge. The great honest courtesans of the Italian Renaissance, such as Tullia d'Aragona, capitalized on this duality. They were women of the flesh who surrounded themselves with classical literature and religious devotion. They transformed the sexual act into something elevated, as if it were transpiring in an uncorrupted paradise. The ambiguity of this high-low mixture remains an enduring snare. The power of the ideal lover also extends far beyond the bedroom. In the political sphere, the cunning diplomat Talleyrand manipulated Napoleon Bonaparte by recognizing the general's secret desire to mirror the grandeur of ancient Roman emperors. By subtly invoking Roman imagery and treating Napoleon as a conquering Caesar, Talleyrand fueled the very ambitions that would elevate them both. Similarly, John F. Kennedy seduced the American public by tapping into the nation's repressed pioneer spirit and its hunger for mythic greatness. By wrapping his presidency in the aura of a new frontier and the romance of Camelot, he bypassed logical political discourse, forging a deeply emotional, almost romantic bond with the masses. Symbol: the portrait painter. Under his eye, all of your physical imperfections disappear. He brings out noble qualities in you, frames you in a myth, makes you godlike, immortalizes you. For his ability to create such fantasies, he is rewarded with great power. Dangers. The most perilous threat to the ideal lover is the sudden intrusion of reality. Because your power relies on an illusion of perfection, any overt display of human flaw, baseness, or vulgarity can instantly shatter the spell. When the Renaissance courtesan Tullia d'Aragona behaved too overtly like a common prostitute, the spiritual fantasy evaporated, and she was forced to flee the city's judgment. To maintain the illusion, one must carefully manage exposure. Casanova mitigated this risk by ensuring his affairs were brief. He would engineer a graceful departure before the mundane realities of sustained intimacy could tarnish his idealized image. Prolonged exposure inevitably reveals the cracks in the canvas. The romantic poet Alfred de Musset was completely captivated by the larger-than-life persona of the writer George Sand. Yet, during a trip to Venice, Sand fell ill with dysentery, and Musset revealed a whiny, childish temperament. The physical unpleasantness and emotional weakness destroyed their mutual idealization, forcing them to separate until distance allowed the fantasy to reform. In the political realm, leaders who rely on mythic idealization face similar risks. Though history shows that if the initial fantasy is powerful enough, the public will often forgive later revelations of human frailty, preferring the comforting myth to the disappointing reality. Nevertheless, the consummate ideal lover must remain eternally vigilant, keeping the less glamorous aspects of their nature carefully concealed behind the glowing portrait they have painted. Part 1. The seductive character. The dandy. The vast majority of humanity is imprisoned within the suffocating confines of expected societal roles. We are assigned our parts early in life, dictated by gender, class, and convention, and we act them out with a heavy, predictable sense of obligation. Enter a figure who shatters this dreary conformity, a creature of supreme fluidity and ambiguity who refuses to be categorized. This archetype is a master of self-creation, an individual who molds their own physical and psychological persona with the meticulous care of an artist. They are immensely alluring because they radiate the very freedom we desperately crave but fear to grasp. By playing effortlessly with the boundaries of masculinity and femininity, they appeal to the deeply repressed narcissism within each sex, creating a hypnotic, almost unsettling fascination. The seduction often begins with a mesmerizing subversion of traditional gender dynamics. Consider the arrival of a young Italian immigrant in early 20th century America who possessed no extraordinary wealth or conventional skills. He survived as a taxi dancer in the bustling halls of Manhattan, a profession that required him to expertly guide women across the floor. In this intimate environment, he became an unparalleled student of female psychology. He learned to mirror their grace, to dress with an impeccable, almost fastidious attention to detail, and to court them with a slow, captivating rhythm. When he eventually transitioned to the silver screen as Rudolph Valentino, he brought this intoxicating alchemy with him. In films where he played exotic, heightened figures, he exhibited a physical grace and a delicacy of movement that were decidedly feminine. Yet this was masterfully paired with an underlying aura of absolute control and a subtle hint of masculine danger. He wooed as a woman might woo if she were a man, paying exquisite attention to the ambience, the flowers, the lingering touch of a hand, setting a languorous pace before executing a bold, inescapable conquest. The women in the audience were paralyzed with adoration. He had utilized the traditionally female weapons of seduction, visual adornment, delayed gratification, and aesthetic charm against women themselves. The effect is profoundly disarming. By mirroring a woman's own feminine traits, the seducer bypasses her natural defenses. He offers her a beautiful, familiar reflection, making her feel completely understood before asserting a dominance that leaves her helplessly enthralled. Conversely, the female seducer achieves devastating power by appropriating the psychological armor of the male. In the late 19th century, a young Russian intellectual named Lou von Salome captivated a succession of Europe's most brilliant minds, from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche to the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Her allure did not stem from traditional coquetry or submission. Instead, she possessed a fierce, uncompromising independence and an intensely analytical intellect. When men engaged with her, they were initially drawn by her radiant beauty, but they were soon plunged into a thrilling confusion. She mirrored their deepest philosophical thoughts, yet she maintained a terrifying emotional distance, refusing to be conquered or bound by the conventional chains of marriage. She projected a masculine self-possession, making it clear that her life and her work were paramount. Men are accustomed to holding the psychological upper hand through detachment. When a woman wields that exact same detachment, completely neutralizing their power, they are driven to madness. They yearn to break her resolve, to be the one to tame her fiercely independent spirit. This psychological androgyny unleashes repressed desires, drawing men into a relationship that feels daring, transgressive, and wonderfully perilous. The mechanics of this archetype rely on an unwavering commitment to nonconformity. Humans are inherently social, slavishly imitating the styles and opinions of the herd. This figure stands apart, a rare and beautifully cultivated anomaly. This difference is manifested physically, but never through vulgar or desperate bids for attention. It is found in the subtle, striking detail: a velvet suit of an unexpected color, a distinctive cane, a perfectly orchestrated imperfection that makes the rest of the world look utterly mundane. Furthermore, they approach the world with a magnificent impudence. They care nothing for the approval of others, and this supreme indifference is magnetic. In a society where everyone is desperately striving to please, the individual who remains aloof, who makes their own life an exquisite, aesthetic adventure rather than a chore, becomes an object of intense social fascination. We are naturally drawn to those who seem entirely self-contained and who treat the rigid rules of polite society with a delightful wink of disdain. The essence of this character is perfectly captured by the orchid. It is a flower of decadent beauty, highly cultivated and impossibly rare. Its strange, ambiguous shapes subtly suggest the anatomy of both sexes, emitting a sweet, almost sinister fragrance. It is a tropical blossom of transgression, utterly unlike any common flower found in a familiar garden. Yet to walk this path is to invite profound hostility. By playing with the deeply ingrained anxieties surrounding gender and societal roles, this seducer inevitably provokes the vicious envy and hatred of their own sex. Men utterly despised the delicate, graceful actors who stole their wives' imaginations, relentlessly attacking their masculinity. Women reviled the fiercely independent female intellectuals, labeling them destructive and cold. Furthermore, this defining impudence must be wielded with supreme tactical awareness. If the insolence crosses the line from a theatrical, captivating amusement into a genuine, threatening insult, especially against those holding literal, worldly power, the seducer risks brutal retaliation. The master of this art must know how to be delightfully rebellious without triggering the insecurities of those who possess the power to crush them. Part 1. The seductive character, the natural. The journey into adulthood is invariably a process of accumulation, an accumulation of anxieties, rigid expectations, and heavy psychological armor. As the years advance, the spontaneous, uninhibited spirit of childhood is systematically suppressed, replaced by a calculating defensive posture necessary for survival in a complex, often unforgiving society. We learn to measure our words, to hide our true desires, and to approach the world with a guarded skepticism. This necessary evolution, however, exacts a profound toll. A lingering, unspoken melancholy resides within the adult psyche, a deep-seated yearning for the lost paradise of youth where emotions were experienced purely and the world was a canvas of infinite, glittering possibility. Into this landscape of quiet desperation steps a figure of unparalleled, refreshing ease. This archetype does not seduce through aggressive intellectual maneuvering or dark, transgressive danger. Instead, they bypass the formidable fortresses of adult cynicism by embodying the very essence of what has been lost. They radiate an aura of effortless spontaneity and enchanting vulnerability that instantly disarms those they encounter. They are the eternal child residing within an adult form, operating with a joyful, uncalculated grace that makes the heavy burdens of maturity feel momentarily suspended. The psychological traits that constitute this enchanting magnetism are rooted in a profound openness. Foremost among these is an aura of genuine innocence. In a world characterized by hidden motives and strategic deceptions, a person who appears completely transparent, who responds to the world with unfeigned surprise and unguarded emotion, is an irresistible anomaly. This innocence is not necessarily synonymous with ignorance or a lack of experience. Rather, it is a deliberate or inherent refusal to be hardened by the world. It is a state of perpetual freshness. Accompanying this is a spirit of impish playfulness. The adult world is governed by rigid rules of decorum and endless, solemn responsibilities. The natural subtly subverts these constraints, engaging in harmless mischief and playful rebellion. They refuse to take the solemnity of adult life seriously, and their infectious, light-hearted defiance invites others to briefly abandon their own rigid roles and join in the joyous transgression. Furthermore, this archetype possesses an extraordinary capacity for wonder. While the average adult views the world through a lens of habit and familiarity, rendering the miraculous mundane, the natural sees everything with the wide-eyed fascination of a sudden discovery. Their enthusiasm is unforced and entirely captivating. When they direct this intense, delighted attention toward a target, the effect is intoxicating. The target feels uniquely seen, cherished not for their wealth or status, but for their fundamental human essence. Finally, there is a profound undefensiveness. Most individuals navigate relationships anticipating attack or rejection, constantly shielding their weaknesses. The natural, however, wears their vulnerability openly. By displaying a genuine need for protection or guidance, they neutralize any aggressive instincts in their target. The target is suddenly transformed from a skeptical adversary into a willing, devoted guardian. The historical embodiment of these traits reveals the staggering reach of this form of charm. Consider the unprecedented global phenomenon of Charlie Chaplin. In the early days of cinema, a medium still searching for its emotional vocabulary, Chaplin introduced a character that transcended language and culture, the Little Tramp. He did not present himself as a traditional hero or a glamorous icon. Instead, he was a creature of profound vulnerability, a small, ragged figure navigating a massive, indifferent, and often hostile mechanical world. He walked with a distinctive, innocent shuffle, perpetually optimistic despite endless misfortunes. When faced with aggressive authority figures or insurmountable odds, he responded not with calculated force, but with a surprising acrobatic grace and a childlike impudence. Audiences were not merely entertained, they were deeply emotionally captured. Chaplin tapped into a universal reservoir of sympathy. Men and women alike felt an overwhelming urge to protect this delicate, unpretentious soul. He brilliantly utilized the physical language of childhood, the exaggerated facial expressions, the sudden, uninhibited bursts of joy or sorrow, to bypass the critical faculties of his audience. He made the world laugh, but more importantly, he made them care, proving that supreme vulnerability is a far more potent instrument of mass seduction than an aura of invincibility. A similar, yet distinctively different energy erupted in the Parisian cabarets of the 1920s with the arrival of Josephine Baker. Paris at that time was the intellectual and artistic center of the world, teeming with sophisticated minds steeped in high culture and complex philosophies. Into this highly refined, slightly exhausted environment exploded a young, wildly uninhibited dancer from America. Baker did not attempt to master the intricate, formalized steps of classical European dance. She performed with a raw, visceral energy, her movements entirely spontaneous, wildly comedic, and undeniably sensual. She would frequently cross her eyes, puff out her cheeks, and physically mock her own exotic allure. The sophisticated Parisians were utterly mesmerized. To them, she represented the ultimate natural, a creature completely untainted by the neurotic, over-intellectualized constraints of modern civilization. She embodied the myth of the noble savage, a spirit of pure, unfiltered joy. By refusing to conform to the serious, self-important atmosphere of the artists and intellectuals who surrounded her, she reduced them to adoring children. They clamored for her attention, desperate to bask in the radiant, unforced warmth she projected. She seduced an entire continent by simply refusing to act like a guarded, rational adult. To cultivate the gravity of this archetype, one must learn to unlearn. It requires a conscious shedding of the cynical armor acquired over a lifetime. It is the art of returning to a state of emotional receptivity, allowing yourself to be genuinely moved, surprised, and delighted by the world. It involves projecting a sense of weakness that requires strength, an innocence that requires guidance, pulling the target out of their own self-absorption and casting them in the flattering role of protector and guide. The symbol for this irresistible force is the lamb. Soft, unthreatening, and utterly devoid of malice, the lamb grazes peacefully in the meadow. It cannot fight, nor does it attempt to. Its very defenselessness is its ultimate defense. No one wishes to harm the lamb. Instead, the natural human instinct is to shelter it, to hold it close, and to preserve its delicate innocence against the harsh winds of the world. However, the path of the natural is fraught with unique and devastating perils. The power of this character rests entirely on the illusion of unforced spontaneity. If the target ever perceives that the innocence is a calculated mask, or that the vulnerability is a strategic manipulation, the spell is violently broken. The charm instantly curdles into resentment, and the seducer is exposed as a cynical fraud, far more deceitful than the average, guarded adult. Furthermore, the most relentless enemy of this archetype is time itself. The physical and behavioral markers of childishness, the wide eyes, the impish pranks, the reliance on others for protection, can possess a profound charm in youth or early adulthood. Yet, as the years advance, these very same traits can rapidly degenerate into something entirely different. What was once enchanting can become deeply pathetic. An older individual clinging desperately to the mannerisms of a child evokes pity rather than desire, highlighting a tragic refusal to mature. Therefore, the master of this art must possess a supreme self-awareness. They must recognize when the bloom of youthful innocence naturally begins to fade, gracefully transitioning into a different, more mature manifestation of charm, or subtly adapting their spontaneity into a refined, ageless eccentricity, ensuring that the magic endures long after the literal twilight of youth has passed. Part 1. The seductive character, the coquette. Human beings are creatures profoundly driven by contradiction. We are inherently suspicious of that which is offered to us freely, viewing easy affection as a sign of desperation or low value. Conversely, we are inexorably drawn to that which eludes our grasp. The harder a prize is to attain, the more deeply we value it. The coquette is the supreme architect of this psychological paradox. They do not seduce through overwhelming physical allure, eloquent declarations, or deep emotional empathy. Instead, they operate through a calculated economy of presence and a masterful manipulation of distance. They are intensely self-sufficient, radiating an aura that suggests they are entirely complete without the target. This inherent detachment is infuriatingly attractive. It challenges the target's ego, sparking a relentless drive to conquer the unconquerable and to become the sole focus of this fiercely independent entity. By never offering complete satisfaction, the coquette keeps the target in a perpetual state of hungry anticipation. The most visceral manifestation of this archetype relies on a deeply disorienting rhythm of passion and profound withdrawal. In the chaotic aftermath of the French Revolution, a young, ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte found himself completely entranced by Josephine de Beauharnais. Josephine was a woman of the world, older, deeply refined, and accustomed to a life of aristocratic leisure. Initially, she offered the fiercely energetic Napoleon intoxicating warmth and validation, pulling him into her sophisticated orbit. He was rapidly consumed by a blazing, desperate passion, convinced he had found his ultimate muse. Yet, the moment they were married and he departed for his military campaigns in Italy, the dynamic violently shifted. Napoleon wrote her impassioned, burning letters daily, begging for her affection and her physical presence. Josephine, secure in her newly minted status, responded with agonizing infrequency. Her letters, when they did arrive, were brief, polite and completely devoid of the fierce passion he craved. Furthermore, she remained in Paris, entertaining other men and plunging into the vibrant social scene, ensuring that rumors of her infidelity eventually reached the battlefield. Napoleon, a man capable of commanding massive armies and bringing empires to their knees, was reduced to a state of weeping, hysterical despair. His focus fractured. His entire existence became consumed by the agonizing question of whether Josephine truly loved him. He threatened, he pleaded, he raged, but her cool, erratic distance only deepened his obsession. By alternating intense, almost intoxicating bursts of attention with agonizing periods of icy neglect, this variant of the character paralyzes the target's rational mind. The sudden withdrawal of warmth triggers a profound anxiety in the victim. They obsessively review their own actions, desperate to discover what they did to extinguish the passion, entirely blind to the fact that the withdrawal is a deliberate, structural tactic. When the warmth is finally, briefly returned, it is experienced as a magnificent, euphoric victory, binding the victim even tighter to the emotional roller coaster. The target is never allowed to feel secure, and therefore never allowed to lose interest. While the alternating dynamic relies on dramatic shifts in emotional temperature, another, perhaps more insidious manifestation operates on a principle of absolute, mesmerizing neutrality. This figure does not engage in fiery flirtations followed by cruel abandonment. Instead, they project a fascinating, enigmatic blankness. In the vibrant, chaotic art world of 1960s New York, Andy Warhol constructed an empire upon this very premise. Surrounded by frantic, emotionally volatile artists and desperate socialites, Warhol cultivated an aura of profound passivity. He rarely spoke above a whisper. He offered no strong opinions, no aggressive critiques, and almost no emotional validation. He was a mirror, a cool, reflective surface in a room full of burning egos. This profound lack of engagement functioned as a powerful vacuum. People naturally rushed to fill the silence. They performed for him. They confessed their deepest, most shocking secrets. They engaged in outrageous behavior, all in a desperate, often pathetic attempt to elicit a reaction from his stony facade. Warhol understood a dark truth about human narcissism. We are desperately eager to project our own brilliance onto a blank canvas. By withholding judgment and affection, he elevated his own status to that of a godlike arbiter. To be noticed by him, even briefly, was a triumph precisely because he noticed so little. This strategy requires immense self-control. The practitioner must resist the natural human urge to connect, to agree, or to comfort. By remaining utterly detached, they force the world to come to them on their hands and knees. The underlying engine that drives this entire archetype is a profound, almost feline self-containment. Humans are acutely attuned to the energy of need. When someone demonstrably needs us, we may feel flattered momentarily, but the gravitational pull is weak. We feel secure in our dominance. The coquette projects the exact opposite. They are comfortable in their own skin, occupied with their own pleasures, and seemingly indifferent to the presence or absence of the target. This independence triggers an immediate, aggressive response in the human ego. We cannot stand to be ignored by someone who appears completely satisfied without us. We are driven to disrupt their peace, to make them need us, to prove our own irresistible worth. Furthermore, the strategy is anchored in the absolute mastery of delayed gratification. The coquette never surrenders immediately. They understand that quick consummation extinguishes the fire of imagination. They string the target along, offering tantalizing hints of future pleasure, but always placing obstacles in the path. These obstacles might be sudden prior engagements, moral scruples, or inexplicable shifts in mood. By forcing the target to wait, to work, and to overcome barriers, the coquette ensures that the target's investment in the pursuit becomes massive. By the time the target finally achieves any level of intimacy, the emotional cost is so high that they are thoroughly enslaved to the value they have been forced to assign to the coquette. The essence of this maddening, irresistible force is the shadow. It is an entity that exists only in relation to your own movements, yet remains forever out of your grasp. If you run toward it, lunging to capture it, it swiftly flees ahead of you, maintaining its distance. But the moment you become exhausted, turn your back, and attempt to walk away, it silently and persistently follows right behind you. It cannot be forced into submission. It dictates the terms of the engagement through its very elusiveness. However, wielding this specific psychological weapon requires exquisite calibration, for its inherent risks are severe. The delicate balance between hope and despair is easily shattered. If the withdrawal is too absolute or the periods of coldness extended for too long without a restorative glimpse of warmth, the target's frustration will inevitably curdle into bitter resentment. The human spirit can only endure so much neglect before the instinct for self-preservation overrides the obsession, and the target will simply abandon the pursuit, seeking easier, more comforting harbors. Moreover, this calculated manipulation of insecurity and jealousy generates a tremendous amount of latent anger. The target knows on some level that they are being tortured even if they cannot break free. The master of this art must be highly attuned to the rising pressure of this resentment. They must know exactly when to relent, when to offer a sudden, disarming display of genuine vulnerability or affection to soothe the wounds they have so meticulously inflicted. Failure to apply this balm can result in the target's anger turning destructive, violently severing the bond, or, worse, seeking revenge against the architect of their emotional torment. The game of the coquette is thrilling, but it is played on the very edge of a precipice. Part 1. The seductive character, the charmer. The realm of romantic and social entanglement is inherently volatile. The introduction of raw physical desire often brings with it a tempest of insecurities, jealousies, and emotional disruptions that can easily sever a bond that might otherwise have flourished. The charmer navigates this treacherous landscape by extracting the most intoxicating elements of romantic pursuit, the absolute focus, the elevation of self-worth, the exquisite sensation of being courted, and masterfully deploying them while keeping actual sexuality simmering just beneath the surface. They do not eradicate physical tension. Rather, they use it as an unstated, tantalizing possibility, maintaining a delicate balance where actual consummation is deferred in favor of profound psychological comfort. The charmer operates as a mirror, deflecting all attention away from themselves and casting a warm, highly focused glow directly onto their target. By aiming at the universally vulnerable targets of vanity and self-esteem, they orchestrate a seduction that feels like a soothing balm rather than a conquest. To cast this particular spell, one must master the art of total absorption in the other person. The charmer fades into the background, becoming an unparalleled listener and observer. While the vast majority of humanity is desperately waiting for their turn to speak, the charmer invites the target to take the stage. As the target talks, they unwittingly reveal their secret insecurities, their unfulfilled desires, and the specific contours of their ego. Armed with this intelligence, the charmer tailors their interactions with absolute precision. They do not offer generic compliments. They validate the exact qualities the target desperately wishes to see in themselves. Furthermore, the charmer becomes a wellspring of pleasure and distraction. They do not burden the target with their own woes or the heavy realities of the world. Instead, they provide lightheartedness, aesthetic delight, and a comforting illusion. When faced with antagonism or potential conflict, they never meet force with force. They yield, they indulge, they smooth over sharp edges, completely disarming aggressive instincts through unruffled grace. By mirroring the target's values and adopting their moods, the charmer lulls them into a profound state of ease. In moments of adversity, while others panic, the charmer maintains a serene self-possession, offering a calm harbor in the storm. Finally, they make themselves indispensable. They quietly arrange favors, connect the target with valuable allies, and follow through on their promises, ensuring that the target's life is vastly improved by their presence. Through this multifaceted approach, they make the target deeply, irrevocably dependent on them. History provides magnificent blueprints of this dynamic. Consider the extraordinary relationship between Queen Victoria and her Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli. In the 1870s, Victoria was a monarch drowning in profound grief following the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert. She had retreated from the public eye, her spirit withered, her court shrouded in a seemingly endless mourning that was beginning to damage the monarchy's standing. Enter Disraeli, a figure who could not have been more unsuited to her temperament on paper, a flamboyant man of Jewish descent with a background as a dandy and a romantic novelist. Yet, where other politicians approached the Queen with dry policies and solemn statecraft, Disraeli approached her as a human being. He recognized the crushing loneliness beneath her royal exterior. He did not argue with her melancholy. He validated it. But more importantly, he spoke to her of romance, of grand mythology, comparing her to great queens of antiquity. He famously noted that when flattering royalty, one must lay it on with a trowel. Yet, His flattery was so personalized, so exquisitely attuned to her suppressed desire to be seen as both a powerful sovereign and a captivating woman, that she blossomed under his attention. He listened to her with an intensity she had not experienced since Albert's passing. Through pure, unadulterated charm, Disraeli not only coaxed the Queen back into the world, but secured for himself unparalleled political power, grounded entirely in her absolute personal devotion to him. This power of charm extends seamlessly into the theater of war and mass politics. During the Chinese Civil War, the communist leader Zhou Enlai demonstrated that a nation could be seduced as effectively as an individual. By making highly visible symbolic gestures of personal sacrifice, Zhou proved to the masses that he shared their pain, projecting a selfless devotion that earned him the profound, unorganized adoration of the public. This same mastery applied to his enemies. When tasked with managing the captured nationalist general Chiang Kai-shek, a bitter, lifelong adversary whose execution seemed certain, Zhou chose the path of charm. To humiliate or execute Chiang would only martyr him and guarantee the vicious retaliation of his armies. Instead, Zhou approached his captive with supreme respect, playing the humble inferior. He allowed Chiang to preserve his dignity, slowly guiding the general from the terror of execution to the overwhelming relief of unexpected release. By softening the general's heart through deference, Zhou secured vital time and political concessions. The charmer understands that making an adversary emotional, whether through gratitude, relief, or vanity, while remaining perfectly detached oneself, is the ultimate tactical advantage. Similarly, the young Catherine the Great navigated the lethal, treacherous court of 18th century Russia not through aggressive maneuvering, but through strategic charm. Brought to Russia as a mere German princess to marry the childish, erratic Peter III, Catherine found herself utterly isolated in a hostile environment. While her husband offended the church, the military, and the public with his abrasive, unyielding behavior and his infantile obsessions, Catherine played a flawlessly patient game. She embraced the Russian Orthodox faith, mastered the language with astonishing speed, and displayed a quiet, dignified piety, appearing more Russian than the Russians themselves. She deferred to the imposing older royals and smiled patiently at her husband's public insults. Outwardly, she was a paragon of submissive grace. Inwardly, she was calculating and waiting. She became a blank canvas of virtue upon which the Russian people could project their hopes. When her husband's behavior finally triggered a breaking point, Catherine did not have to orchestrate a violent military campaign. The soldiers, the priests, and the public willingly carried her to the throne, utterly enchanted by the serene, patriotic mirror she had held up to them. Her charm had completely disguised her immense ambition, allowing her to seize an empire without firing a single shot. The essence of this archetype is the mirror. When individuals look into a mirror, they do not see the glass itself. They see their own reflection, which they inherently find fascinating and comforting. The charmer becomes that reflective surface. By reflecting a person's tastes, their values, and their most idealized version of themselves, the charmer creates a hypnotic, inescapable loop of self-love. The target is so deeply engaged in admiring the reflection you provide that they never attempt to look behind the mirror to discern your true motives. However, the path of the charmer is not without its perils. This subtle art requires absolute sincerity of execution. If the target senses the calculation behind the flattery, the charm instantly curdles into unctuous manipulation. Furthermore, there are certain types who are fundamentally immune to this approach. The deeply cynical, the radically self-sufficient, and those devoid of a delicate ego will see no value in the charmer's reflections. With such individuals, the charmer's ingratiating manner will only provoke irritation. The master of this art must therefore possess the discernment to know when to deploy the mirror and when to quietly withdraw before the illusion shatters. Part 1. The seductive character. The charismatic. The human condition is frequently defined by an undercurrent of uncertainty. The vast majority of people navigate their lives plagued by doubts, lacking a clear, unified sense of purpose. They drift through daily routines, secretly hungering for direction, for a cause to believe in, or for a figure who can instantly dispel the fog of their anxieties. Into this void steps an individual of breathtaking inner certainty. The charismatic does not seduce through the traditional avenues of physical temptation or calculated flirtation. Instead, they conquer through the projection of an intense, unmistakable radiance. They appear to be illuminated from within, driven by a profound vision or a supreme self-belief that renders them completely immune to the petty insecurities that torment the masses. This unwavering conviction is the ultimate psychological magnet. When a person stands perfectly resolute, radiating focused energy and absolute purpose, others are helplessly drawn into their orbit, desperate to warm themselves by the fire of that conviction and to absorb a fragment of that self-assurance for themselves. The mechanics of this allure rely heavily on a mastery of presence and emotional resonance. The charismatic operates on a grand scale. They possess an energy that fills a room, an invisible gravity that commands attention the moment they appear. This is frequently channeled through the art of eloquence. They are master orators, understanding that language is most potent when it bypasses cold logic and strikes directly at the heart. They use rhythmic, impassioned speech to articulate the unvoiced frustrations and the highest aspirations of their audience. In doing so, they elevate the mundane struggles of their followers into a magnificent shared crusade. Whether they are a revolutionary leader, a spiritual guide, or a magnetic public figure, they make their targets feel as though they are participating in something monumentally important. Yet this explosive outward expression is masterfully balanced by a profound, carefully maintained mystery. The charismatic is never entirely knowable. If they were to reveal every detail of their ordinary lives, the spell would instantly shatter. They cultivate a deliberate distance, allowing the public to project their own divine fantasies onto the leader's carefully constructed silhouette. They exhibit a paradoxical nature. They are intensely present and emotionally accessible in their public declarations, yet personally aloof and unreachable. This duality fuels endless fascination, forcing the target or the crowd to constantly reach for them, never quite able to close the gap. To embody this powerful archetype, one must learn to marshal and project inner vitality. It requires the cultivation of a piercing, unblinking focus. The charismatic's gaze does not dart nervously. It rests upon its target with a calm, penetrating intensity that suggests immense hidden depths. Furthermore, one must learn to weaponize vulnerability. While they project invincibility in their cause, the most sophisticated charismatics occasionally reveal a carefully selected weakness, a physical frailty, a deep sorrow, or the heavy burden of their mission. This sudden flash of humanity does not diminish their power. Rather, it ignites a fierce, protective devotion in their followers. The audience feels uniquely privileged to witness the suffering behind the greatness, bonding them irrevocably to the leader. The symbol of this captivating force is the lamp. In the sprawling, terrifying darkness of a chaotic world, the lamp provides a singular point of brilliant, focused illumination. Men and women are naturally drawn out of the shadows and toward its glowing center, seeking its warmth, its guidance, and the comforting illusion of safety it casts against the unknown. However, wielding this specific form of influence is akin to handling a highly volatile element. The power of the charismatic is entirely dependent on the continuous maintenance of an illusion. Because they are elevated to the status of something more than human, they are held to an impossibly high, unforgiving standard. If the charismatic stumbles, if they display petty greed, ordinary cowardice, or a sudden lack of conviction, the reaction of their followers is catastrophic. The public does not merely forgive and forget. The intense love and adoration that propelled the leader to the heights of power violently inverts into a vicious, destructive hatred. The followers feel profoundly betrayed by the revelation of their idol's mortality. Furthermore, the sheer exhausting effort required to constantly project such massive, unwavering energy can lead to burnout or fatal miscalculations. The charismatic must perpetually reinvent their mystery and deliver continuous emotional triumphs, forever feeding the insatiable hunger of the crowd, or risk having their radiant light permanently extinguished. Part 1. The seductive character, the star. The reality of daily existence is often a landscape of harsh constraints, mundane routines, and inescapable pressures. Because the waking world can be so unforgiving, the human mind habitually seeks refuge in the ethereal realm of fantasies and daydreams. The star is the archetype that capitalizes on this fundamental human weakness. By presenting a persona that is visually striking yet emotionally distant, the star transforms into an object of intense fascination. They appear as creatures from another world, vague and ungraspable, allowing the observer to project their own deepest desires onto a blank, glittering canvas. This dreamlike quality bypasses logical thought, operating directly upon the unconscious. The fetishistic star. In the frantic, desperate scramble of early 20th century Berlin, a casting call for a silent film attracted hundreds of aspiring actresses. In a sea of women overtly attempting to flaunt their sexuality and command the director's attention, one figure stood out precisely through her absolute lack of effort. She dressed simply, held a puppy adorned with a delicate necklace, and moved with a languorous, insolent grace. She smoked a cigarette with slow, deliberate gestures, radiating a detachment that was instantly hypnotic. The casting director was paralyzed by her presence. Her name was Marlene Dietrich. Years later, when the renowned director Josef von Sternberg sought the lead for his film The Blue Angel, he was captivated by this same insolent stare and provocative physicality. He did not merely direct Dietrich, he sculpted her. Through the meticulous application of lighting, gauze, and makeup, he elevated her from a mortal woman into a cinematic fetish, a living statue onto which millions could project their fantasies. The mechanism of this allure mirrors the ancient myth of Pygmalion, the sculptor who carved an ivory statue so flawless he fell madly in love with his own creation. The fetishistic star becomes an object of supreme artifice. They are a surface so impeccably crafted that the viewer is mesmerized by the exterior, never questioning the depth beneath. This archetype understands that a blank, unreadable face is infinitely more compelling than one that aggressively broadcasts its emotions. By remaining seemingly empty, they invite the world to fill the void with its own desperate yearnings. The mythic star. While the fetishistic star operates on personal obsession, the mythic star commands the adoration of the masses. John F. Kennedy understood that political maneuvering alone could not secure the absolute devotion of a nation. Drawing upon his knowledge of Hollywood and the mechanics of the silver screen, he did not present himself as a mere politician. He fashioned himself as a living myth. He studied the detached, cinematic coolness of leading men, projecting an aura of youthful vitality merged with patriarchal nobility. He bypassed dry intellectual policy debates, choosing instead to speak in grand, unifying themes: the new frontier, the revival of the pioneer spirit, the dawn of a modern Camelot. The mythic star taps into the unconscious archetypes shared by all of humanity. We are divided by logic, class, and ideology, but we are united by our primal fears and our hunger for heroic narratives. By adopting the silhouette of a mythic figure, the rebellious youth, the wise sovereign, the tragic hero, this seducer bypasses rational scrutiny. They operate on a grand stage, framing their opponents as villains and their own campaigns as epic crusades. They remain physically and emotionally aloof, allowing the public to worship the icon from afar, safely untainted by the mundane realities of ordinary human interaction. Keys to the character. The profound power of seduction lies in its ability to bypass the conscious mind. If you attempt to persuade by directly stating your intentions, you will inevitably encounter the formidable walls of human cynicism and defensiveness. The star circumvents this heavy armor by operating on the fluid logic of the dream. When we awaken from a powerful dream, we are haunted by a strange fusion of reality and impossibility. The star cultivates this precise sensation in waking life. They anchor themselves in reality with tangible, alluring physical traits, but they simultaneously project a surreal, otherworldly aloofness. To master this character, you must transform your presence into a cinematic close-up. In a theater, an actor is a small, real figure on a distant stage bound by physical space. But the camera isolates the face, magnifying it until it dominates the viewer's entire field of vision. You must command this kind of space in the mind of your target. Cultivate a signature style that instantly distinguishes you from the crowd, yet remain vague enough to evade absolute definition. Your face must become a mask of enigmatic stillness. Emoting and expressing every fleeting feeling limits your power. An impassive, slightly cold demeanor forces the target to lean in, to interpret, to invent the narrative. The star is ultimately an idol, an effigy of seduction. In the modern era, where true spiritual ecstasy is often scarce, society transfers its devotion to figures of immense presence and calculated absence. You dazzle not merely through your talents, but through your cultivated distance. By becoming a mirror, a polished surface reflecting the unspoken desires of your audience, you achieve a level of psychological penetration that ordinary, overly accessible humans can never attain. Symbol: the idol. A statue of stone or wood, beautifully carved and decorated. It cannot speak, it cannot move, yet its very stillness commands worship. People fall to their knees before it, projecting their own fears, hopes, and prayers onto its unblinking eyes. Dangers. The illusion woven by the star is intensely powerful, yet inherently fragile. Because your power relies entirely on a manufactured, dreamlike distance, the sudden intrusion of reality can instantly shatter the spell. If the public or the target glimpses the mundane machinery behind the magic, the petty arguments, the ordinary human flaws, the desperate need for validation, the myth dissolves into bitter disappointment. Furthermore, the very distance that generates this intense fascination can provoke a dangerous backlash. People may eventually tire of an idol that never responds, or worse, they may feel mocked by your absolute coldness. The hatred inspired by a fallen star is merely the dark, violent inverse of the love they once commanded. You must walk a precarious tightrope, remain ethereal enough to invite endless fantasy, but human enough to prevent the target from feeling utterly alienated and abandoning the pursuit entirely. Part 1. The seductive character. The anti-seducer. The art of drawing another person into your orbit relies almost entirely on your ability to direct intense, individualized attention outward. Seduction is a delicate dance of psychological penetration, requiring a keen sensitivity to the subtle shifts in the other person's moods and desires. In stark contrast to this stands a figure defined by an absolute inability to grasp the internal world of anyone but themselves. The anti-seducer. These individuals do not merely fail to attract, they actively repel. Their fundamental flaw is a crippling, pervasive insecurity that turns their gaze entirely inward. Consumed by their own anxieties, needs, and self-conscious fears, they are blind to the psychological realities of those around them. They operate without a shred of self-awareness, oblivious to when they are suffocating someone with unwanted attention, talking incessantly, or demanding reassurances that extinguish any spark of romance. Seduction requires the subtle cultivation of pleasure and anticipation. The anti-seducer offers only the heavy, uninspiring burden of their own ego. It is crucial to identify these traits, both to ruthlessly eradicate them from your own character and to quickly recognize them in others, for there is absolutely no value or joy to be found in their presence. The forms these individuals take are varied, yet they all share the same poisoned root of insecurity. There are those who blunder through social interactions with the impatience of a brute, entirely disregarding the crucial rituals of courtship. They assume that their own immediate desires are paramount, showing no willingness to wait or to elevate the experience into something aesthetic. Their impatience betrays a deep-seated egotism and a subconscious fear that if they delay, they will be rejected. Then there are the chronically self-absorbed, the individuals who view every interaction through the narrow lens of their own vanity. They cannot interpret the subtle signs or wordless communications that form the true language of intimacy, because they are too busy worrying about how they appear or what they can extract from the encounter. They impose their own rigid expectations, completely failing to adapt to the fluid, playful reality of the moment. Equally dangerous are those whose insecurity manifests as a relentless need to complain, to argue, or to impose their own moral judgments on the world. The moralizer uses self-righteousness as a weapon to mask their fear of human complexity and pleasure. They cannot tolerate the ambiguity and playfulness required in seduction, preferring the safety of rigid rules and condemnation. Furthermore, the presence of stinginess, whether an unwillingness to part with money or a broader emotional ungenerosity, is a fatal flaw. Seduction demands an atmosphere of lavishness, a willingness to give and to surrender. The miserly spirit, clutching tightly to its possessions and its emotions, suffocates any potential for enchantment. While the best approach is to identify these individuals and swiftly remove yourself from their sphere, there are times when their specific repelling energy can be utilized strategically. Anti-seduction is not merely a failure, it can be weaponized as a deliberate defense mechanism. When confronted with an overwhelming or dangerous seducer from whom you must escape, fighting them with emotion or anger will only feed their game, proving that you have successfully engaged your passions. The ultimate defense is to deliberately adopt the traits of the anti-seducer. By presenting a facade of absolute indifference, by talking endlessly about yourself, by being painfully literal, ungenerous, or morally rigid, you neutralize their psychological hooks. You become an impenetrable wall of dullness, depriving them of the emotional friction they require to operate. They will quickly lose interest and seek more compliant prey. As you master the ability to repel the unwanted and attract the desirable, you must turn your analytical gaze toward the individuals who populate your world, recognizing them as potential targets. Every human being carries within them a profound sense of incompleteness. No one feels entirely whole. There is always a void, a missing piece in the architecture of their character, a yearning for something they cannot achieve alone. When people fall in love, they are often unconsciously reaching out to someone who appears to possess the very qualities they lack. The master of this art does not leave this profound psychological matching to chance. Instead, you must learn to penetrate the social masks people wear. Ignore the confident exterior, focus entirely on the subtle indicators of their internal emptiness. A fleeting expression, a recurring theme in their conversation, the way they furnish their home, or the specific nature of their past disappointments. These are the vital clues that reveal the shape of the void within. Once you decipher what a person is missing, you hold the ultimate key to their psychological surrender. People constantly broadcast their unmet needs. They long for the illusion or the reality of completeness. If you can position yourself as the source of that missing element, your power over them becomes absolute. It is a fundamental law of this dynamic that you must never attempt to captivate someone whose psychological makeup mirrors your own. Two individuals lacking the same crucial pieces cannot complete one another. They will only amplify each other's deficiencies. You must seek out the contrast, the puzzle piece that precisely matches the negative space within your target. The landscape of potential targets can be understood through a typology of 18 distinct victims, each defined by their specific unmet need. Consider the individual who was once a fearless conqueror of hearts but who has been forced into domesticity or respectability by age or societal pressure. This reformed figure harbors a secret, burning resentment at the loss of their former freedom. To ensnare them, you need only offer the intoxicating illusion that they can briefly escape their constraints and reclaim their dangerous past. Provide them with the stage to be a conqueror once more, and they will follow you anywhere. Then there is the individual who grew up immersed in romantic literature and myth, developing a grandiose fantasy life that reality has consistently failed to match. Trapped in mundane relationships, they are profoundly disappointed by the ordinary flaws of human beings. To captivate this dreamer, you must become the embodiment of their preferred fiction. Conceal your own mundane qualities and construct a narrative of mystery and chivalry. If you provide even a fragment of their grand romance, their starved imagination will eagerly fill in the rest, binding them to the illusion you have crafted. Similarly, you will encounter the individual who was relentlessly spoiled in their youth, taught that the world existed solely to cater to their whims. As adults, they struggle with routine and constantly seek out new distractions, moving restlessly from one experience to the next. What they truly crave, however, is a return to that state of absolute passive reception. To bind this type, you must become the tireless orchestrator of their pleasures, providing a constant stream of novelty, spectacle, and indulgent attention. Once they realize you are the source of the varied delights they crave, they will become intensely dependent on your presence. There are those who have adopted a rigid stance of moral purity, often as a desperate defense against their own intensely repressed desires. This new Puritan is secretly fascinated by the very transgressions they publicly condemn. Their rigid exterior is a dam holding back a reservoir of dark, unexplored impulses. The strategy here is not to challenge their morality directly, but to slowly, safely introduce the possibility of the forbidden. By allowing them to experience a taste of the transgressive while maintaining a facade of innocence, you offer a thrilling release that bypasses their conscious defenses. Some individuals possess a brilliant past, a period of fame or intense adoration that has since faded. They are haunted by the memory of being the center of the universe and are paralyzed by the comparative silence of their present reality. To capture them, you must become the mirror that reflects their former glory. Give them the absolute worshipful attention they believe is their birthright. Make them feel that in your eyes they are still a towering figure of brilliance, and they will cling to you as the sole validator of their fragile ego. Others navigate the world with a profound sense of inexperience, feeling intimidated by the complexities of romance and power. They are desperately seeking a guide, an initiator who can lead them safely into the adult world of pleasure. With this type, you assume the role of the patient, masterful teacher. Your confidence and worldly knowledge become immensely attractive, offering them a safe harbor from which to explore their own awakening desires. Conversely, some targets are driven by a relentless need to dominate and conquer. They view every interaction as a battle of wills and are entirely uninterested in anything that surrenders too easily. To entice this aggressive spirit, you must become the ultimate elusive prize. Present yourself as a formidable challenge, a fortress that requires their utmost skill and energy to breach. By resisting them strategically, you ignite their competitive fire, turning their need for control into the very mechanism of their own enslavement. The exotic fetishist. There exists a type of individual driven by an intense, almost obsessive fascination with the foreign and the unfamiliar. This exotic fetishist feels a profound emptiness and often harbors a deep-seated rejection of their own background, social class, or culture. Their homes are frequently adorned with artifacts from distant lands, and their travels are constant attempts to escape themselves. To captivate this victim, you must project an aura of the alien. Position yourself as an exotic outsider, exaggerate your differences, and turn your unique background into a theatrical display. Because they are chronic self-deluders, they will eagerly magnify the fantasy you present. However, be warned, their interest is difficult to sustain, as their underlying insecurities and insatiable need for novelty mean that whatever exoticism you offer will eventually feel ordinary to them. The drama queen. Some individuals cannot endure the quiet equilibrium of a peaceful life. To stave off the terrifying specter of boredom, the drama queen requires a constant influx of turmoil and conflict. If you approach this type offering stability, comfort, and a safe harbor, they will quickly flee. They harbor a deep psychological need to play the victim and extract a perverse pleasure from enduring pain and complaining about their tragic circumstances. To seduce them profoundly, you must be willing to provide the mental friction and emotional rough treatment they secretly crave. The moment you become entirely accommodating, they will manufacture a quarrel or discard you entirely. While an extended involvement with a drama queen requires immense energy to continuously orchestrate new crises, they can provide a thrilling, fleeting amusement if you are prepared to manage their chaotic emotional storms. The professor, trapped within the sterile confines of their own overdeveloped intellects, professor types analyze and critique every facet of existence. They approach even matters of the flesh and the heart with heavy, paralyzing logic. Often compensating for a deep-seated feeling of physical inadequacy, they assert their dominance through mental superiority, looking down upon those they deem less intelligent. Yet beneath this armor of irony and erudition lies a desperate yearning to be liberated from their mental prisons. They secretly long to be overwhelmed by sheer, unadulterated physical presence. To capture the professor, you must offer a total escape from the mind. Conceal your own intellectual capacities, allowing them to retain their cherished sense of mental superiority. Instead, overwhelm them with raw physical stimulation, playing the role of the uninhibited sensualist. They will surrender entirely to the one who can silence their relentless, internal monologue. The beauty. From the earliest moments of her life, the beauty is defined by the gaze of others. This constant adoration is the source of her immense power, but it is equally the root of her profound isolation and anxiety. She lives in perpetual fear of her fading allure and is quietly devastated by the monotonous reality of being valued solely for her exterior. Men often approach her with intimidating reverence or shallow lust, leaving her intellectually and spiritually starved. To seduce the beauty, you must bypass the obvious. While you cannot ignore her physical perfection, doing so would trigger her deepest insecurities. You must actively validate the qualities that others overlook: her intellect, her hidden talents, her inner character. Furthermore, because she is accustomed to being the passive recipient of attention, she harbors a repressed desire to be the pursuer. By introducing a calculated coldness and a touch of coquetry, you challenge her to take the initiative, transforming her from a worshipped idol into an active, devoted pursuer. The aging baby. Terrified by the relentless march of time and the heavy burdens of adulthood, the aging baby clings desperately to the carefree existence of youth. They shirk responsibility, attempting to transform every aspect of life into a game. While this prolonged adolescence can be momentarily charming, it inevitably becomes exhausting. Paradoxically, the aging baby does not seek another child to play with. They require a grounding force. To seduce this type, you must assume the role of the responsible, indulgent adult. By taking on the heavy lifting of reality, you provide them with the ultimate luxury, the freedom to remain a child. If you manage their affairs without judgment or criticism, they will form an intense, dependent attachment to you, finding the protective parental figure they unconsciously seek. The rescuer. While many are moved by vulnerability, the rescuer is uniquely drawn to the broken and the troubled. Their desire to help is often a complex mechanism to assert control, feel superior, and distract themselves from their own internal conflicts. You will recognize them by their intense empathy and their history of entanglements with dependent partners. To ensnare the rescuer, you must become the flawless damsel in distress, or the misunderstood, vulnerable soul unable to navigate a cruel world. Exaggerate your sadness and your string of misfortunes, allowing them to envelop you in their maternal or chivalric care. You can even invite moral rescue by confessing to past transgressions, granting them the thrilling combination of moral superiority and proximity to the forbidden. The roue, having exhausted the world's sensual offerings, the roue possesses a cynical, jaded exterior that masks a surprisingly sentimental core. They have lived a life financed by wealth and dedicated to hedonism, but as their years advance, they are haunted by the memory of their lost innocence. To captivate this consummate seducer, you must embody the very purity they covet. Emphasize your youth, your lack of worldly experience, and your uncorrupted perspective. Crucially, you must resist their advances. The roue thrives on the chase, and by maintaining your distance and letting them pursue your innocence, you reverse the traditional dynamic. Because they have repressed their romantic vulnerabilities for so long, this manufactured chase can bypass their cynical defenses, leading them into a profound, uncontrollable infatuation. The idol worshipper. Burdened by a massive internal void and a crippling lack of self-worth, the idol worshipper searches endlessly for a grand cause, a spiritual movement, or a charismatic figure to adore. This intense focus outward is a desperate attempt to escape themselves. To bind this victim, you must seamlessly insert yourself as their new object of devotion. Initially, you may need to mirror their spiritual or idealistic interests, but eventually you must elevate yourself to the status of the ideal. Conceal your mundane human flaws beneath a saintly or mythic veneer. Because their minds are often overactive and prone to suspicion, you must anchor their devotion with intense physical experiences that silence their doubts. Never attempt to build their self-esteem. Their role is to worship you, and any attempt to elevate them will only shatter the hierarchical illusion upon which their devotion depends. The sensualist. The sensualist navigates a world that largely ignores the subtle language of the senses, leaving them starved for aesthetic and physical stimulation. They are hyper-responsive to their environment, deeply affected by lighting, colors, scents, and textures, yet they often hide this acute sensitivity behind a shy or unassuming exterior. To seduce the sensualist, you must construct an environment that bypasses their intellect and appeals directly to their starved senses. Envelop them in visual spectacle, exquisite fragrances, and beautiful settings. By orchestrating a symphony of sensory details, you paralyze their rational defenses, rendering them pliable and easily led. The lonely leader. Individuals who occupy the highest echelons of power are condemned to a life of profound isolation. They are surrounded by sycophants and subordinates who treat them with fearful reverence or calculated flattery. The lonely leader is starved for genuine human interaction and the bracing impact of an honest equal. To seduce the powerful, you must strip away the expected deference, treat them as a peer, or even adopt a slightly superior, blunt tone. By refusing to bow to their authority, you provide the rare thrill of authentic friction. This bold approach shatters their isolation, making your presence an intoxicating relief from the echo chamber of their daily existence. The floating gender. Many individuals feel deeply constrained by the rigid gender roles society imposes upon them. They harbor traits and desires that do not align with traditional expectations of masculinity or femininity, leaving them feeling alienated and misunderstood. The floating gender longs for an environment where these boundaries dissolve. To captivate them, you must project a fluid, androgynous presence. By playing with gender dynamics, showing vulnerability if you are a man, or adopting an aggressive, independent stance if you are a woman, you offer them a comforting mirror. In your presence, they feel the intoxicating freedom to relax their assigned roles and explore the repressed, ambiguous facets of their own nature. This concludes the study of the anti-seducer and the meticulous identification of the victims who wander the social landscape. By recognizing these unmet needs and mastering the art of the seductive character, you have prepared the psychological ground. The citadel of the victim's mind is now vulnerable, awaiting the precise tactical maneuvers of the seductive process itself. Part 2. The seductive process. Phase 1. Separation. Stirring interest and desire. Chapter 1. Choose the right victim. The entire architecture of a successful seduction rests upon a single, foundational pillar, the selection of the appropriate target. All subsequent maneuvers, no matter how brilliantly executed or deeply calculated, will inevitably collapse if directed at a person who is fundamentally immune to your specific gravity. In the theater of influence, desire is not a force that can be uniformly applied to any subject. It is a chemical reaction that requires precisely matching elements to ignite. The gravest error one can commit is to succumb to the blindness of one's own ego, assuming that sheer willpower or physical attractiveness can conquer anyone. The master of this art understands that the power does not reside entirely within themselves. It resides in the carefully identified weakness of the person they choose to pursue. The optimal target is never a fortress of perfect contentment. Individuals who are profoundly satisfied with their lives, wholly consumed by a passionate vocation, or deeply entrenched in a fulfilling romantic bond, are practically impenetrable. They lack the necessary internal void required for you to take root. Instead, you must become a meticulous hunter of vulnerabilities, seeking out the quiet, unspoken dissatisfactions that plague the human psyche. The ideal subject is someone harboring a subtle emptiness, a lingering boredom with their routine, a suppressed yearning for adventure, or a deep-seated feeling of being chronically unappreciated by their current circle. You must look for the cracks in their psychological armor. Particularly vulnerable are those navigating periods of acute transition. An individual who has recently suffered a heartbreak, relocated to an unfamiliar environment, or experienced a sudden shift in their professional standing is psychologically unmoored. They are floating in a state of chaotic uncertainty, quietly desperate for a stabilizing force. In these moments of profound disorientation, their natural defenses are significantly lowered, making them highly susceptible to the sudden appearance of a captivating, defining presence that promises to anchor their drifting reality. Beyond the presence of a void, the target must inherently possess a vibrant, active imagination. Seduction is not a process of logical argumentation, it is the orchestration of an illusion. The subject must be capable of taking the subtle hints, the ambiguous glances, and the carefully placed absences you provide, and weaving them into a grand, obsessive fantasy within their own mind. If you engage with a person who is stubbornly literal-minded, entirely practical, or devoid of romantic sensibility, your efforts will fall on barren ground. They will only see what is physically present, entirely missing the intoxicating subtext that fuels the seductive dynamic. You will find yourself exhausted, forced to constantly explain your actions to a mind that cannot dream. Furthermore, the selection process demands a rigorous, unsentimental assessment of your own nature. You must choose a counterpart whose psychological architecture perfectly complements your chosen archetype. If you project the aura of the commanding fiery rake, you must seek out a target who secretly yearns to be overwhelmed and relieved of their own heavy responsibilities. If you inhabit the ethereal, detached realm of the star, you require a victim with a deep capacity for idol worship and passive adoration. To pursue someone whose underlying nature mirrors your own is to invite stagnation. A mirror cannot seduce a mirror. There must be friction, contrast, and an exchange of polar energies to generate the necessary spark. The observational phase of this pursuit requires absolute patience and a refusal to rush the approach. You must study the landscape of your potential quarry from a distance, looking past the confident social masks they present to the world. Pay close attention to their contradictions, the moments when their actions violently betray their stated beliefs, the sudden flashes of irrational anger, or the lingering melancholy sighs that escape when they believe they are unobserved. These are the distress signals of a captive soul eager to be led astray. By understanding the specific nature of their past disappointments, whether an overbearing parent or a string of shallow lovers, you map the exact dimensions of the void you must prepare to fill. Imagine the discipline of the master hunter navigating a dense, ancient forest. They do not wander aimlessly, wasting their ammunition on every shadow that flits across the tree line. They study the tracks, observe the watering holes, and wait for the perfect moment. They seek the creature that has unconsciously strayed from the safety of the herd, the one that limps slightly, or the one that exhibits a curious, fatal tendency to linger in the clearing. The hunt is an exercise in profound, deliberate isolation. The prey is chosen not randomly, but because it has already, through its own actions and vulnerabilities, unconsciously offered itself to the pursuit. Yet, there exists a rare, perilous deviation from this absolute rule of seeking the vulnerable. There are moments when a master seducer deliberately bypasses the easy conquest, choosing instead to fix their gaze upon a seemingly impossible target. They pursue the notoriously devout, the happily married, or the fiercely independent, driven entirely by the intoxicating vanity of the supreme challenge. Conquering a target universally deemed unassailable yields a psychological triumph and a public reputation of unmatched magnitude. However, this path is exceptionally treacherous. It requires an exorbitant expenditure of energy, time, and tactical brilliance, and the risk of humiliating failure is immense. For all but the most seasoned and ruthless practitioners, engaging a fully fortified mind is a dangerous folly. The fundamental law remains: the certainty of your victory is secured the very moment you select a victim whose internal hunger is precisely calibrated to the feast you intend to provide. Chapter 2. Create a false sense of security. Approach indirectly. This chapter focuses on the necessity of bypassing a target's natural defenses. A direct, overt romantic advance often triggers suspicion or resistance. Instead, the approach should be disguised by initially presenting oneself as a neutral entity, such as a platonic friend, a helpful acquaintance, or someone introduced through a third party. The seducer lulls the target into a false sense of security. Without the pressure of a romantic pursuit, the target relaxes and opens up. Only after this foundational trust and comfort are firmly established does the seducer slowly begin to introduce subtle romantic or alluring elements, gradually shifting the dynamic before the target fully realizes what has happened. Chapter 3. Send mixed signals. This chapter explores the importance of cultivating an aura of mystery and unpredictability to deepen a target's intrigue. Once a baseline of interest is established, being entirely straightforward or predictable can lead to the target losing interest. By intentionally projecting contradictory qualities, such as combining an air of innocence with subtle hints of worldly experience, or intellectual depth with flashes of raw emotional vulnerability, the seducer creates a captivating puzzle. This ambiguity frustrates the target's ability to easily categorize the seducer, forcing them to expend mental energy trying to interpret the mixed messages. This constant preoccupation effectively draws the target deeper into the seducer's orbit, as they become obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the contradictions. Chapter 4. Appear to be an object of desire. Create triangles. Human beings are inherently social and relentlessly competitive creatures. We rarely form our desires in a vacuum. Our yearnings are almost always shaped and validated by the desires of those around us. When we observe a person standing alone, ignored and seemingly unwanted, our natural instinct is to assume there is a hidden flaw, a reason for their isolation. They appear as a solitary figure, possessing no magnetic pull, and therefore they stir no curiosity within us. Conversely, when we encounter someone who is surrounded by admirers, someone who is clearly the focus of intense attention and pursuit, a powerful psychological mechanism is violently triggered. We are immediately drawn to them, captivated by the aura of desirability they project. If so many others find this individual enchanting, we unconsciously reason they must harbor some extraordinary hidden quality. The architect of a masterful seduction understands this fundamental quirk of human nature and manipulates it to devastating effect. To conquer a target, you must never appear needy, isolated, or desperately available. Instead, you must carefully construct a mirage of immense popularity. You must position yourself as an elusive prize, a coveted treasure that others are already fighting to possess. Consider the mesmerizing dynamic orchestrated by a brilliant young Russian intellectual in the late 19th century. When Lou von Salome crossed paths with the philosopher Paul Rée in Rome, she quickly perceived his intense fascination with her. Yet, rather than simply welcoming his advances or coldly rejecting them, she introduced a masterful psychological complication. She knew that Rée was a close companion of the towering philosophical figure Friedrich Nietzsche. Feigning an intense intellectual curiosity, she insisted that Rée invite Nietzsche to join them, proposing an unconventional trio of minds. This simple request instantly destabilized Rée. He had discovered this remarkable young woman. She was his prize, and the very thought of sharing her, especially with a man of Nietzsche's formidable intellect, ignited a burning, uncontrollable jealousy. He wrote impassioned letters to his friend, his words inadvertently betraying his desperate infatuation, which in turn functioned as a powerful lure, sparking Nietzsche's own curiosity and desire before he had even laid eyes on her. When Nietzsche finally arrived, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Salome did not favor one over the other. She engaged deeply and passionately with both, ensuring that whenever she was alone with one man, the shadow of the other loomed large and threatening in the background. The two brilliant philosophers were rapidly reduced to anxious, competitive suitors, They were no longer merely pursuing a fascinating woman, they were battling one another for absolute supremacy. Salome maintained this agonizing geometry for years. Even when she eventually settled into a shared apartment with Ray, she ensured she was constantly surrounded by a harem of adoring intellectuals. The men in her orbit were driven to madness by the unspoken knowledge that they were entirely replaceable. Decades later, she employed the exact same dark alchemy on Sigmund Freud, introducing his brilliant young disciple Victor Tausk into their dynamic, transforming the stoic founder of psychoanalysis into a jealous, competing suitor. Her power was absolute because she never allowed herself to be owned by one. She belonged to the crowd of her admirers, leaving each individual desperate to separate her from the pack. This is the very essence of creating triangles. It is a calculated, unapologetic manipulation of human vanity and greed. When you introduce the presence of others, past lovers, current suitors, or even just a devoted circle of friends, you fundamentally alter the target's perception of your value. You are no longer just a person, you are a highly sought-after commodity. The target's ego becomes deeply and inextricably entangled in the pursuit. To win you is not simply to gain a companion, but to triumph over rivals, to prove themselves superior to the crowd. This competitive urge completely bypasses their rational defenses. They become so consumed by the terror of losing you to someone else that they completely forget to question whether they truly want you in the first place. The keys to mastering this particular facet of seduction lie in the strategic deployment of social proof. You must never boastfully announce your own worth. You must let the actions and the longing of others proclaim it for you. The most effective way to accomplish this is to cultivate a mysterious, slightly distant aura while ensuring that you are consistently seen in the company of attractive, interesting individuals. Let it be known, through subtle hints or the deliberate whispers of third parties, that your past is littered with conquests and that your present is crowded with viable options. If you are a woman, let a man sense that you are accustomed to the highest standard of courtship, that you have been adored and spoiled by men of substance. If you are a man, cultivate a quiet reputation as someone who understands and is deeply loved by women. A dark, slightly scandalous reputation can be immensely useful here. If a target believes you have broken hearts and left a trail of devoted, weeping victims in your wake, their own vanity will convince them that they are the unique, powerful soul who can finally tame you. Furthermore, to truly set the hook, you must subtly introduce a rival. This rival does not necessarily need to be a physical presence in the room. It can be the lingering memory of an ex-lover whom you occasionally mention with a wistful, distant sigh, or a persistent suitor whose letters or gifts you casually leave where they can be inadvertently discovered. The target must feel a constant, low-level anxiety that your attention is drifting, that someone else is actively vying for the space they so desperately wish to occupy. If you are courting someone, be warm and engaging, but occasionally pull back, act inexplicably distracted, or show a sudden intense interest in a third party. This sudden withdrawal of attention, coupled with the phantom threat of a rival, will strike absolute terror into their heart. They will rush to reclaim their position, expending enormous emotional energy to prove their worth to you. It is crucial, however, to orchestrate this triangulation with absolute theatrical finesse. If your machinations are too obvious, you will appear manipulative, transparent, and cruel. The presence of the rival must seem entirely accidental, a natural, unavoidable consequence of your irresistible charm. You must remain outwardly innocent, feigning genuine surprise that your actions have caused such emotional turmoil. The target must believe that their burning jealousy is their own internal flaw, a product of their overwhelming, uncontrollable desire for you rather than a reaction to a trap you have so deliberately set. By mastering this delicate balance, you transform a simple, romantic pursuit into a high-stakes, psychological drama, guaranteeing that the target's obsession with you will only deepen and darken with time. The ultimate symbol of this dynamic is the trophy. An object of exquisite craftsmanship, gleaming under the harsh lights, it possesses no practical use, yet men will exhaust themselves, plot relentlessly, and fight bitterly to raise it above their heads. Its value is not intrinsic. It is determined entirely by the number of fierce competitors desperate to claim it as their own and deny it to everyone else. Yet there is a necessary reversal to consider, a distinct and ever-present danger in overplaying the creation of triangles. If the competition appears too fierce, or the manufactured rivals too formidable, a target with a fragile ego may simply surrender before the battle has even truly begun. Overwhelmed by the exhausting prospect of fighting for your attention, they will retreat to safer, far less demanding harbors. Furthermore, if you flaunt your other admirers with too much arrogance, you risk appearing hopelessly narcissistic, cold, and unfeeling. The goal is to stimulate frantic desire through a carefully measured dose of anxiety, not to inflict profound and paralyzing humiliation. The target must always believe that they have a genuine fighting chance of winning the ultimate prize. If you make the fortress seem entirely unassailable, the siege will simply be abandoned. Therefore, you must constantly monitor the emotional temperature of your victim. When their jealousy reaches a dangerous boiling point, when their insecurity threatens to drive them away out of sheer self-preservation, you must offer a sudden, deeply comforting reassurance. You must make them feel that despite the glittering, clamoring crowd that surrounds you, they alone possess the secret key to your heart. This calculated oscillation between fierce, terrifying competition and exclusive, tender validation is the very lifeblood of an enduring and absolute seduction. Chapter 5. Create a need. Stir anxiety and discontent. The illusion of contentment is the greatest barrier to true influence. Human beings naturally seek a state of equilibrium, meticulously building comfortable, predictable lives that insulate them from chaos and emotional turbulence. When you encounter a target who is thoroughly satisfied with their daily routine, their current romantic entanglements, or their social standing, they present a smooth, impenetrable surface. There is no friction, no internal void to exploit, and no desperate grasping for something more. To initiate a seduction in such a tranquil environment is akin to striking a match against wet stone. Before you can successfully offer yourself as the ultimate prize and the solution to their desires, you must first disturb their cherished peace. You must awaken them to the tragic limitations of their existence, planting the insidious, creeping seed of discontent. A mind suddenly plagued by anxiety, tormented by the realization that its life is mundane, lacking true passion, or rapidly slipping away, becomes intensely, beautifully vulnerable. They will desperately seek a cure for this newfound emotional pain, and having quietly orchestrated the disease, you perfectly position yourself as the only available remedy. The keys to executing this psychological maneuver require the absolute precision of a surgeon. You cannot bluntly insult the target, openly criticize their lifestyle, or overtly attack their choices. Such crude aggression will only harden their natural defenses and breed an immediate, impenetrable resentment. Instead, the poison must be administered through subtle, offhand remarks, meaningful glances, and lingering philosophical observations. You might casually, almost accidentally, draw their attention to the fading spark and predictable dullness in their current relationship. You might softly, with feigned sympathy, question whether they have truly fulfilled the grand, boundless potential of their youth, or if they have simply settled for a life of quiet compromise. You speak eloquently of grand adventures, of deep, consuming passions, and of transcendent aesthetic experiences that they have clearly missed out on, constantly contrasting the magnificent, dangerous possibilities of the world with the stark, grey, suffocating reality of their daily routine. By subtly mirroring their own deeply buried insecurities and bringing them to the surface, you force the target to confront the quiet desperation they have spent years trying to ignore. As this realization takes root in their mind, a profound, restless anxiety begins to blossom. Their previous comfort transforms into a stifling prison. They feel a sudden, urgent need for validation, for a dramatic disruption, for a revitalization of their withered spirit. It is precisely at this moment of manufactured desperation, when they are thrashing against the suddenly visible confines of their life, that you step forward. You radiate the exact qualities they now realize they are desperately lacking: freedom, danger, intense focus, or supreme aesthetic elevation. You do not merely offer romantic companionship. You offer absolute salvation from the terrifying mediocrity you have just exposed. You become the necessary escape hatch from their own escalating anxiety. The symbol for this critical stage of the process is the wound. A person who possesses a perfectly healthy, unblemished body has no need for a physician, nor do they spare a single fleeting thought for bandages, soothing balms, or the art of healing. They walk confidently through the world, entirely oblivious to the cure because they do not feel the affliction. But the moment a physical cut is inflicted, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, their entire psychological focus violently narrows to the source of that pain. They become instantly, intensely dependent on the one who possesses the medicine to heal it, willingly surrendering their autonomy and their wealth for the simple, overriding promise of relief. You must be the one who quietly wields the blade and then, with open arms, offers the bandage. However, this aggressive manipulation of a target's internal stability carries an inherent, absolute reversal. You must exercise extreme caution and flawless judgment when dealing with individuals who are already profoundly broken by the world. If a target is currently engulfed in a genuine, devastating crisis, if they are suffering from severe clinical depression, mourning a recent and profound loss, or drowning in an overwhelming pre-existing wave of anxiety, inflicting further emotional wounds will not make them compliant. It will shatter them completely, or it will drive them to seek shelter far away from your dark, unsettling presence. With a victim whose spirit is already bleeding, the strategy must instantly and dramatically pivot. You must abandon the creation of discontent entirely and immediately assume the role of the ultimate comforter. You become the serene, unshakable harbor in their terrifying storm, offering uncritical support, soothing relief, and absolute safety. By expertly reading the emotional landscape of your target, you determine whether they require the sharp, awakening sting of the blade to ignite their dormant desire, or the immediate enveloping application of the cure to secure their absolute, grateful devotion. Chapter 6. Master the Art of Insinuation. This chapter transitions into the second phase of the seductive process, focusing on how to plant ideas in a target's mind without triggering their defenses. Direct declarations of intent or blunt romantic advances are easily recognized and can be swiftly rejected. Instead, the seducer must rely on the subtle power of insinuation. By utilizing ambiguous language, fleeting physical contact, and seemingly innocent remarks that carry a hidden subtext, you bypass the target's conscious rational guard. The objective is to drop carefully crafted hints that take root in their subconscious, causing them to dwell on the possibilities long after the interaction has ended. When executed masterfully, insinuation causes the target to believe that the escalating romantic or seductive thoughts are entirely their own original desires, completely masking the fact that you planted the seed. Chapter 7. Enter their spirit. This chapter explores the strategy of overcoming a target's natural resistance by temporarily abandoning your own ego and adopting theirs. People are generally locked into their own worldviews and self-interests, which makes them inherently defensive against outside influence or overt persuasion. To bypass this barrier, the seducer must enter the spirit of the target. This involves deeply observing the other person and mirroring their moods, adopting their hobbies or interests, and validating their core beliefs. By reflecting the target's inner world back to them, you create a profound sense of comfort and narcissistic validation. The target feels uniquely understood and less isolated in the world, which naturally causes their psychological armor to fall away. This act of mirroring is not about permanent submission, but rather a calculated tactical retreat. Once this deep, trusting rapport is established and the target is completely relaxed and open in your presence, you have successfully neutralized their resistance. From this position of inside influence, you can then gently shift the dynamic, subtly asserting your own will and leading them in the direction you desire. Chapter 8. Create temptation. This chapter delves into the strategy of luring a target by identifying and exploiting their hidden weaknesses or repressed desires. The premise is that everyone harbors a secret vulnerability, a yearning for forbidden pleasure, unsanctioned romance, or suppressed adventure that society or their own conscience forces them to conceal. The seducer's task is to uncover this fatal flaw and present a tantalizing glimpse of it to the target. By dangling this specific temptation, making it appear attainable yet just slightly out of reach, the seducer creates an irresistible lure. This effectively distracts the target from any rational reservations or defensive instincts they might hold. As the target becomes consumed by the prospect of satisfying this deep-seated desire, they willingly cross established boundaries and follow the seducer's lead, effectively walking into the trap on their own accord. Chapter 8. Create temptation. Expanded thematic analysis. This chapter focuses on the mechanics of desire and the allure of the forbidden. Greene posits that society forces individuals to repress certain desires, impulses, or curiosities to conform to moral or social standards. Because these urges are suppressed, they become potent psychological triggers. The seducer's objective is to act as a mirror to these hidden yearnings. The strategy requires careful observation to discover what the target secretly craves but denies themselves, whether it is a desire to be rebellious, a hunger for power, or a wish to abandon their strict responsibilities. Once this fatal flaw or hidden void is identified, the seducer must craft a temptation that speaks directly to it. Crucially, this temptation should not be offered directly or aggressively. It must be presented as an ambiguous, tantalizing possibility. The seducer becomes a symbol of the forbidden fruit, lingering just out of reach. This creates an intense internal conflict within the target. Their rational mind urges caution, while their repressed desire demands satisfaction. By keeping the temptation veiled and slightly elusive, the target's imagination takes over. They begin to obsess over the possibility of crossing the line, eventually rationalizing their own surrender. The brilliance of this maneuver is that the target convinces themselves to take the final step, pursuing the seducer to satisfy a hunger they can no longer ignore. Chapter 9. Keep them in suspense. What comes next? The human mind is naturally inclined toward patterns and predictability. In our daily lives, we seek stability and the comfort of knowing what tomorrow brings. However, in the realm of desire, predictability is the silent killer of enchantment. Once a person feels they have fully deciphered your character and can anticipate your every move, their imagination ceases to work. The mystery evaporates, and the pursuit loses its vital tension. To maintain a state of seductive thrall, you must become a source of perpetual uncertainty. You must master the art of the calculated surprise, ensuring that your target is constantly wondering about your next move. By keeping them in a state of heightened suspense, you force them into a position of psychological dependency, where their focus is entirely consumed by the riddle of your behavior. The calculated surprise. Consider the strategic brilliance of a master of the silver screen, or a legendary political figure who understands the power of the unexpected. They do not follow a linear path. Instead, they pivot when the world expects them to proceed straight ahead. They might follow a period of intense public presence with a sudden, unexplained disappearance. Or they might follow a series of kind and generous acts with a moment of startling coldness or a sudden fierce outburst of passion. This is not the erratic behavior of a fool, but the deliberate orchestration of a tactician. When you act in a way that contradicts the story the target has written about you, you shatter their sense of certainty. This creates a vacuum in their mind that they must fill with speculation, analysis, and obsession. They begin to ask, who is this person really? What do they want from me? What will they do next? This internal monologue is the sound of their resistance crumbling. The mechanics of suspense rely on a delicate balance between revelation and concealment. You must provide enough information to keep the target engaged, but never enough to allow them to feel secure. Think of a master storyteller who ends every chapter with a cliffhanger. The audience is not merely interested. They are compelled to continue because the tension of the unknown is unbearable. In seduction, you are the story. You must introduce new facets of your personality just as the old ones are becoming familiar. If you have been seen as a serious intellectual, reveal a sudden, playful spontaneity. If you have been a constant companion, become suddenly unavailable for a day, offering only a vague and intriguing excuse. These small, strategic disruptions act as a catalyst for desire, preventing the relationship from settling into the stagnant waters of habit. Furthermore, the state of suspense triggers a profound physiological and psychological response. When we do not know what is coming next, our senses become hyper-tuned. We are more alert, more emotional, and more susceptible to suggestion. By orchestrating a cycle of anticipation and payoff, where the payoff is always slightly different from what was expected, you create a gambler's high in the target. They become addicted to the emotional highs and lows you provide. The unpredictability makes your presence feel more intense and your absence feel more agonizing. You are no longer just a person in their life, you are a captivating drama in which they are the lead spectator. The symbol for this maneuver is the crossroads. A person traveling down a straight open road can see the horizon clearly. They know exactly where they are going and how long it will take to get there. There is no mystery, only the steady progress of time. But at the crossroads, the path fractures. The traveler must stop, evaluate, and wonder what lies down each hidden trail. The air is thick with possibility and the anxiety of the unknown. By keeping your target at the crossroads, you ensure they can never simply walk away from you, for the mystery of the untaken path is far too tantalizing to leave behind. However, there is a critical reversal to this strategy. Suspense must never degenerate into pure, chaotic incoherence. If your behavior is so erratic and nonsensical that the target feels there is no underlying logic at all, they will eventually stop trying to solve the puzzle. Suspense requires a thread of consistency, a promise of a hidden truth, to be effective. If you push the unpredictability too far, you will be viewed not as a fascinating mystery but as a flighty or unstable individual who is not worth the emotional effort. The goal is to be elusive, not incomprehensible. The target must always feel that if they just look a little closer or try a little harder, they will finally understand you. It is the pursuit of that understanding that keeps them forever in your wake. Chapter 10. Use the demonic power of words to sow confusion. In the structured world of the everyday, language is primarily a tool for clarity, used to transmit information, issue commands, or define boundaries. We rely on words to make sense of our reality. However, the seducer recognizes that language holds a far more sinister and intoxicating potential. Words can be used not to illuminate, but to dazzle, not to explain, but to obscure. By mastering the demonic power of words, you can bypass a target's rational defenses and speak directly to their unconscious desires. This is the art of the verbal spell, the ability to weave a tapestry of phrases that are emotionally resonant but intellectually elusive. When you sow confusion through language, the target's mind loses its grip on logic, leaving them drifting in a sea of sensation where they are vulnerable to your every suggestion. The primary instrument of this confusion is the calculated use of ambiguity and poetic elevation. You do not speak in the flat, literal tones of the marketplace. Instead, you utilize metaphors, grand abstractions, and lofty language that suggests a depth of feeling beyond the ordinary. You speak of destiny, of the soul, and of timeless connections. These words are powerful precisely because they are vague. They act as a mirror into which the target projects their own deepest romantic fantasies. While their mind is busy trying to decode your poetic intent, the emotional rhythm of your voice, its tone, its pace, its hushed intensity, works upon their nervous system like a drug. They are so busy feeling that they forget to think. A master of this technique was the writer Gabriele D'Annunzio. Though he was physically unexceptional, he possessed a voice that was likened to a musical instrument. He would approach women and speak to them in long, flowing sentences filled with archaic words and intoxicating imagery. He did not talk about mundane things, he talked about the inner flame, the unbearable beauty of the moment, and the sacred bond between spirits. Often his listeners would confess that they didn't quite understand what he was saying, yet they were moved to tears by the sheer beauty of his delivery. By using words to create a fog of high-minded emotion, he effectively neutralized their critical faculties. They became so enamored with the world he described that they willingly entered it, unaware that the world was a cage constructed of beautiful phrases. To sow confusion effectively, you must also master the art of the deceptive compliment. A direct, blunt compliment is a tactical error. It is too transparent and can be easily deflected. Instead, you must weave your praise into a larger narrative. Praise qualities the target is unsure they possess, or qualities they harbor in secret. Use language that suggests you see a truer version of them that the rest of the world misses. Furthermore, you must learn to utilize infantile language, soft, repetitive, and rhythmic phrases that mirror the way a parent speaks to a child. This triggers a deep-seated, unconscious regression in the target, making them feel safe and cared for, and lowering the adult barriers of skepticism and self-protection. The ultimate goal of this verbal assault is to create a haze in the target's mind. You alternate between grand, sweeping declarations and intimate, whispered secrets. You tell them one thing with your words while suggesting the opposite with your eyes or your touch. This creates a state of cognitive dissonance. The target cannot find a solid footing. In their confusion, they look to you for clarity, but you only provide more beautiful, disorienting language. They become like a person lost in a thick, sweet-smelling mist. They cannot see the path ahead, so they simply stop fighting and allow themselves to be led by the hand. The symbol for this maneuver is the serpent's tongue. It is forked and flickering, tasting the air for vulnerability. It does not strike with the blunt force of a club, but with the subtle, venomous precision of an injection. Its movement is fluid and hypnotic, drawing the eye away from the danger. The sound of its hiss is not a warning, but a lullaby that promises a dream from which the dreamer will never wish to wake. However, the reversal of this strategy is the danger of the windbag. If your poetic language is too disconnected from reality, or if you speak incessantly without providing any moments of silence or physical payoff, you will eventually become an object of ridicule. the target will tire of the monologue and begin to see the artifice behind the words. Language must be used as a bridge to physical and emotional intimacy, not as a wall that keeps the target at a distance. If you provide no substance behind your style, the confusion you sow will eventually turn into boredom and irritation. The demonic power of words is only effective if it remains a tool of enchantment, a prelude to a conquest that the target believes they have chosen for themselves. Chapter 11. Pay attention to detail. In the heat of a burgeoning romance, the mind is often preoccupied with grand gestures and sweeping declarations. We imagine that love is won through heroic feats or monumental displays of devotion. However, the master of the seductive process understands a more subtle and devastating truth. The human psyche is most easily bypassed through the periphery. While the target is bracing themselves against your overt advances, they are simultaneously absorbing 1,000 tiny, seemingly insignificant signals from their environment. By meticulously managing the smallest details, the specific scent of a room, the strategic choice of a gift, the fleeting touch of a hand, or a particular visual arrangement, you create a sensory experience that overwhelms their rational guard. These microsignals act as a powerful form of hypnosis. Because they appear accidental or natural, they are never questioned by the conscious mind, yet they speak directly to the senses, creating a mood of enchantment that words alone can never achieve. The mesmerizing effect. The core of this strategy lies in the orchestration of a total aesthetic environment. You must transform yourself and the space you inhabit into a carefully curated spectacle. This is not about wealth or vulgar ostentation, but about the evocative power of the specific. Consider the effect of a perfectly timed gift, not something expensive and generic, but something that reflects a deep, silent observation of the target's hidden tastes or past memories. Such a detail proves that you are paying an intensity of attention that most people never receive. It suggests a profound level of care that bypasses the ego and strikes the heart. Similarly, your physical presence must be a collection of mesmerizing details. A unique piece of jewelry, a subtle but intoxicating fragrance, or a particular way of moving that suggests both grace and hidden purpose. These elements create a haze of pleasure that prevents the target from seeing the cold calculation behind the encounter. History offers the example of the great courtesans and dandies who understood that the eyes are the primary gateway to the soul. They would spend hours arranging the lighting of a room to ensure they were seen in the most flattering, dreamlike glow. They utilized flowers, fabrics, and scents to create a theater of the senses that made the mundane world outside appear gray and lifeless by comparison. When the target enters this space, their pulse quickens and their critical faculties soften. They are no longer in a place of business or social obligation. They are in a sanctuary of delight. By focusing on the nuances that others ignore, you signal that you are a person of superior refinement and sensitivity, making your attention a rare and highly valued commodity. To master the art of detail, you must also become a virtuoso of the accidental touch and the fleeting gesture. A lingering look that lasts a fraction of a second too long, a hand that brushes against a shoulder under the guise of a casual movement, or a sudden momentary shift in the tone of your voice. These are the sparks that ignite the imagination. Because they are subtle, they leave the target in a state of exquisite uncertainty. They begin to obsess over these details, wondering if they were intentional or merely a product of their own imagination. This internal debate is the very engine of desire. You are planting seeds of obsession that will grow in the silence of your absence as the target reconstructs every tiny moment of your shared encounter, searching for a meaning that you have carefully hidden in the details. The symbol for this maneuver is the blemish. In a world that strives for a sterile, artificial perfection, a small, strategic imperfection becomes a point of intense fascination. A beauty mark, a slight tremor in the voice, or a single, distinctive flaw in an otherwise impeccable facade. This detail draws the eye and humanizes the seducer, making the target feel that they have discovered a secret, vulnerable truth. It breaks the symmetry of the image and creates a hook for the mind to latch onto. By controlling the blemish, you control where the target looks and what they feel. However, the reversal of this strategy is the danger of the fop or the pedant. If your attention to detail is so obsessive and rigid that it feels stifling and artificial, you will fail to enchant. The details must feel like a natural extension of your character, not a lab-created experiment. If the target perceives the heavy hand of the director behind the curtain, the magic evaporates. You must maintain an air of sprezzatura, the art of making the difficult and the calculated look entirely effortless. The goal is to create a sensory atmosphere that feels like a beautiful dream, where every detail contributes to the whole without calling attention to its own manufacture. If you become a slave to the details, you lose the fluid, spontaneous energy that is essential to a living seduction. Chapter 12. Poeticize your presence. In the initial stages of an encounter, your physical presence is a powerful magnet. But as time passes, the danger of over-familiarity begins to loom. When a person is constantly available and their character becomes entirely predictable, they lose their luster and become part of the mundane landscape of daily life. To sustain a profound seduction, you must elevate your image from a mere mortal to a poetic figure. You must master the delicate rhythm of presence and absence, ensuring that even when you are physically gone, your image continues to occupy the target's mind. By infusing your presence with mystery and your absence with a haunting longing, you transform yourself into a mythic entity that the target cannot help but idealize. Poetic presence, absence. The core of this strategy is the manipulation of the target's imagination. In the presence of a seducer, the target is overwhelmed by sensory details, but it is in the intervals of absence that the true psychological conquest occurs. When you withdraw strategically, you leave a void that the target's mind rushes to fill. They begin to reconstruct your image, smoothing over your flaws and magnifying your charms. This is the process of poeticization. You are no longer a person of flesh and blood, but a character in a drama of their own making. Consider the effect of a sudden, unexplained departure following a period of intense intimacy. The silence you leave behind is not empty. It is loud with questions and shadowed by the memory of your warmth. The target reviews every word you spoke and every gesture you made, searching for clues to your return. By ensuring that your absence is felt as a profound loss, you make your eventual reappearance feel like a triumphant restoration of order and joy. You must alternate between being vividly, dazzlingly present, using all the arts of appearance and charm, and being tantalizingly unreachable. This oscillation keeps the target in a state of emotional flux, preventing them from ever feeling secure enough to become bored. To poeticize your presence, you must also cultivate a sense of mystery regarding your life outside the target's view. If they know everything about your daily routine, your past, and your future plans, there is no room for them to dream. You should hint at hidden depths, untold secrets, and other worlds you inhabit. This makes your time with them feel like a rare privilege, a temporary bridge between their ordinary world and your exotic one. Use your clothing, your choice of language, and your interests to suggest that you are a creature of a different, more refined era or a more exciting reality. Keys to seduction. The successful execution of this chapter requires a keen sense of timing. If you are absent for too long, the target's anxiety may turn to resentment, or worse, they may begin to find comfort in your absence. The withdrawal must occur at the height of their interest, leaving them hungry for more. Furthermore, when you are present, you must be a poetic version of yourself. This means acting with a certain grace and intentionality, avoiding the mundane habits and vulgarities of the everyday. Your actions should feel like a performance, a carefully choreographed dance that suggests a higher level of existence. You must also learn to utilize objects as anchors for your presence. A lingering scent, a book left behind with a marked page, or a small symbolic gift acts as a physical representative of you in your absence. These items keep the target's thoughts tethered to you, turning their private space into a temple of your memory. They see these objects and are instantly transported back to the feelings you evoked, fueling the fire of their obsession until you choose to reappear. Symbol: the pomegranate. It is a fruit of many seeds, hidden behind a tough, unremarkable skin. To taste its sweetness, one must labor to open it. Once tasted, its staining juice and exotic flavor are impossible to forget. It is the fruit of the underworld, associated with the myth of Persephone, a symbol of the cycle of abduction, absence, and seasonal return that keeps the world in a state of perpetual longing and renewal. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of being forgotten or becoming an annoyance. If your absence is too prolonged or happens before you have truly established a poetic image, the target may simply move on. Absence only works if there is a powerful, enchanting memory to feed upon. Additionally, if your poetic presence feels too forced or theatrical, you will appear as a pretender rather than a muse. The artifice must be so well integrated into your character that it feels like an authentic, albeit heightened, truth. if the target suspects they are being manipulated by a series of staged disappearances. The spell of the poem is broken and you are revealed as a common trickster. Chapter 13. Disarm through strategic weakness and vulnerability. In a world governed by competition and the constant pressure to appear strong, competent, and in control, most individuals navigate their social interactions with a thick layer of psychological armor. We are trained to hide our flaws and to present a facade of invincibility. However, the master of seduction recognizes that power and overt strength can often be anti-seductive. They breed suspicion, trigger defensiveness, and create a distance between the pursuer and the target. To truly penetrate a person's defenses, you must occasionally cast aside your shield and reveal a strategic glimpse of your own vulnerability. By displaying a perceived weakness, a moment of hesitation, a genuine emotional hurt, or a physical frailty, you neutralize the target's aggressive instincts. You transform them from a wary observer into a sympathetic protector. This reversal of the power dynamic is one of the most effective ways to secure an immediate and profound emotional connection. The victim strategy. The core of this maneuver is the cultivation of a soft presence. While the previous chapters focused on dazzling the target with your mystery and poetic image, this stage requires a grounding in human fallibility. If you appear too perfect, you become intimidating and unreachable. By showing that you are susceptible to the same pains and insecurities as the target, you make yourself relatable. You invite the target to lower their own guard because they no longer feel threatened by you. This is the art of winning by losing. You allow the target to feel superior to you in a specific moment, which flatters their ego and lulls them into a state of relaxed security. Consider the effect of a confession. By sharing a secret vulnerability, perhaps a story of a past failure, a deep-seated fear, or a sense of being misunderstood by the world, you create an instant bond of intimacy. The target feels privileged to have been chosen as the recipient of such sensitive information. They feel a natural urge to comfort you, to reassure you, and to rescue you from your distress. This impulse to help is a powerful seductive hook. Once a person begins to invest their emotional energy into your well-being, they become increasingly tied to you. They are no longer a passive witness to your charm. They are an active participant in your emotional life. To master this strategy, you must also utilize the physical indicators of vulnerability. A sudden silence, a downward glance, or a slight catch in the voice can communicate more than 1,000 words of explanation. These non-verbal cues suggest an authentic emotion that is bubbling to the surface, seemingly beyond your control. Because these signals appear involuntary, they are far more believable than any calculated speech. The target interprets them as a sign of your true self, and their protective instincts are ignited. You must be the wounded bird that the target feels compelled to nurse back to health. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of strategic weakness lies in its ability to generate sympathy. Sympathy is the most disarming of all emotions. It softens the heart and clouds the judgment. When a target feels sorry for you, they are far less likely to scrutinize your motives or resist your influence. Furthermore, vulnerability creates a vacuum that the target feels a moral obligation to fill. By appearing to need them for guidance, for emotional support, or for simple companionship, you give them a sense of purpose and importance. You must also learn to balance your strength with your weakness. If you are constantly vulnerable, you become a burden, and the target will eventually tire of the emotional labor. The most potent form of this strategy is the sudden, unexpected reveal of weakness in an otherwise strong and self-contained character. This contrast makes the vulnerability feel rare and precious. It suggests that while you are strong for the rest of the world, you are only weak for them. This is the ultimate flattery, making the target feel uniquely powerful and indispensable in your life. Symbol: the tear. It is a small, clear drop of salt water, yet it possesses the power to melt the most hardened of hearts. It is a signal of the internal world breaking through the external facade. It requires no explanation and admits no argument. It is the ultimate white flag of surrender that, paradoxically, secures the most absolute of victories. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of appearing pathetic or manipulative. If your displays of weakness feel staged, excessive, or chronic, you will provoke disgust rather than sympathy. A seducer who is perpetually in need loses their magnetism and becomes an anti-seducer, a source of pity rather than desire. Vulnerability must be a spice, not the main course. Additionally, you must be careful not to reveal a weakness that is genuinely repulsive or that undermines the very core of your seductive archetype. The goal is to show a beautiful or relatable flaw, not one that makes the target lose respect for you entirely. If the mask of vulnerability slips to reveal a cynical calculation, the betrayal felt by the target will be total and irreparable. Chapter 14. Confuse desire and reality, the perfect illusion. The weight of reality is a heavy burden that most people carry with a sense of weary resignation. We are anchored to the ground by our responsibilities, our routines, and the often disappointing nature of human interaction. Because this existence can feel so grey and predictable, the human spirit harbors a desperate, unquenchable thirst for the marvelous. We yearn for a world that matches the vivid intensity of our dreams. The master of the seductive process recognizes that the most profound way to capture a target is to build a bridge between their mundane world and a carefully constructed realm of fantasy. By creating the perfect illusion, you provide a space where their deepest desires take physical form. You become the director of a living theater in which the target is the star, and for a brief, intoxicating moment, the boundaries between what is real and what is imagined dissolve entirely. Fantasy in the flesh. The execution of this illusion requires you to identify the specific nature of the target's repressed daydreams. Every individual has a secret, inner world, a vision of themselves as a tragic hero, a powerful sovereign, a daring adventurer, or a cherished muse. These fantasies are usually hidden because they are socially unacceptable or seemingly impossible to achieve. Your task is to materialize these fragments of the imagination. If the target yearns for the romance of a bygone era, you must provide the atmosphere, the language, and the aesthetic of that world. If they crave a life of danger and transgression, you must lead them to the edge of the abyss. This is not about a single grand gesture, but about a sustained environmental shift. You must clothe yourself in the attributes of their fantasy, becoming the living embodiment of the person they have always dreamed of meeting. Consider the power of the spectacle. When a target is surrounded by beauty, exoticism, or a heightened sense of drama, their critical faculties are overwhelmed. The visual and sensory evidence of the illusion is so powerful that it overrides their rational knowledge that what they are experiencing is a construction. By paying attention to every detail, the lighting, the music, the setting, you create a reality that is more compelling than the one they left behind. They begin to live within the dream you have built, and because you are the architect of that dream, you become the center of their universe. They do not want to wake up, and therefore they do not want to leave you. To confuse desire and reality, you must also master the art of the painless deception. Most people believe they want the truth, but in reality they are grateful for a beautiful lie that makes them feel better about themselves or the world. You must provide the flesh to their fantasy. This means acting as if the illusion is the absolute truth. Never wink at the audience. Never break character. If you treat the fantasy with absolute seriousness, the target will do the same. You are offering them a rare gift, the opportunity to step out of their ordinary skin and into a mythic role. In this state of play, the usual moral and social constraints no longer apply, and the target becomes pliable, willing to follow you wherever the narrative leads. The symbol for this maneuver is the cloud. It is a soft, shifting entity that takes on whatever shape the observer's eye projects onto it. One moment it is a castle, the next a dragon, yet it is composed of nothing but mist and light. It obscures the harsh, unyielding landscape below, replacing it with a realm of ethereal beauty. It has no solid core, yet it dominates the sky, drawing all eyes upward toward its ever-changing, dreamlike form. However, the reversal of this strategy is the danger of the crude fake. If the illusion is poorly constructed, or if the artifice is so blatant that it insults the target's intelligence, the spell will shatter. The fantasy must be grounded in enough reality to be believable, yet elevated enough to be enchanting. If the target catches a glimpse of the scaffolding behind the scenery, they will feel manipulated and foolish, leading to a violent rejection of the seducer. Furthermore, you must be careful not to let the fantasy become too detached from the target's true psychological needs. If you build a palace of ice for someone who yearns for the warmth of the sun, they will eventually grow cold and seek to escape. The perfect illusion is only effective if it serves as a vessel for the target's own deepest and most authentic desires. Chapter 15. Isolate the victim. In the natural state of social existence, an individual is anchored by a complex web of external influences. They are surrounded by friends who offer advice, family who impose moral standards, and a daily routine that reinforces their existing identity. These connections act as a psychological support system, providing the target with a stable sense of reality and a fortress of rational defenses. To achieve a total seduction, you must systematically dismantle this support structure. You must draw the victim away from their familiar world and into an environment where you are the sole source of influence. By isolating the victim, physically, emotionally, and psychologically, you create a vacuum in which their old self begins to wither, leaving them vulnerable to the new reality you wish to impose. The core of this strategy is the creation of a haze of separation. It begins subtly by fostering a sense of us against the world. You highlight the ways in which the target's friends or family fail to truly understand them, or how their professional life is a soul-crushing burden. You become the only person who truly appreciates their hidden depth. As the target begins to lean more heavily on your validation, they naturally start to drift away from their traditional anchors. This is not a forced abduction, but a voluntary retreat. You provide a sanctuary that feels infinitely more exciting and meaningful than the mundane world they are leaving behind. Physical isolation is the most direct tool in this process. By taking the target to unfamiliar places, a secluded retreat, a foreign city, or even just a part of town they never visit, you strip them of the comfort of the known. In a new environment, they cannot rely on their habits or their social status for security. They become like a child in a strange land, looking instinctively to you for guidance and protection. This displacement triggers a profound psychological shift. When the external world disappears, the internal world and your presence within it becomes magnified. The target's focus narrows until you occupy their entire field of vision. Beyond physical distance, you must achieve emotional isolation. You do this by stirring up intense, private emotions that the target cannot share with anyone else. By involving them in a secret, a transgressive act, or a shared fantasy, you build a wall between the two of you and the rest of society. This secret world creates a powerful bond of complicity. The target feels that to return to their old life would be to betray the unique, intense experience they have shared with you. They become a stranger to their own past, trapped in an eternal present where only your approval matters. The symbol for this maneuver is the island. It is a world unto itself, separated from the mainland by a vast and treacherous sea. On the island, the laws and customs of the continent no longer apply. The air is different, the colors are more vivid, and the passage of time follows a different rhythm. To reach the island is to leave one's former life behind. To stay on the island is to forget that the mainland ever existed. You are the sovereign of this territory, and the victim is your sole, enchanted guest. However, the reversal of this strategy is the danger of the prison. If the isolation feels forced, or if the target begins to feel suffocated and controlled, they will experience a sudden, violent claustrophobia. They will view you not as a liberator or a lover, but as a captor. True seductive isolation must always feel like a choice, an invitation to a more beautiful reality, not a sentence to a lonely one. You must be careful to provide enough psychological space within the isolation so the victim doesn't feel the walls closing in. If they sense the bars of the cage, they will expend all their energy trying to break them rather than surrendering to the enchantment. Chapter 16. Prove yourself. In the languid progression of a seduction, there inevitably comes a moment of stagnation. The target has been charmed, isolated, and fed a diet of poetic illusions, but a part of their mind remains stubbornly tethered to reality. They may begin to doubt your motives or wonder if your dazzling persona is merely a hollow shell. To shatter this last vestige of resistance, you must move beyond words and atmosphere. You must perform a self-sacrificial act, a test that proves the depth of your devotion. By taking a risk, incurring a cost, or coming to their aid in a moment of genuine crisis, you provide the blood that makes the ghost of your seduction real. This act of proof functions as a psychological contract. Once the target witnesses your willingness to suffer or sacrifice for them, their remaining defenses collapse under a wave of gratitude and guilt. The heroic feat. The core of this maneuver is the transition from the aesthetic to the ethical. Throughout the earlier phases, you have been a creature of play and artifice. Now, you must appear as a man or woman of action. The proof does not need to be a grand cinematic rescue, though that is certainly effective. It can be a smaller, more intimate sacrifice, defending their honor against a critic, staying by their side through a difficult illness, or risking your reputation to help them achieve a goal. The key is that the act must involve a perceivable cost to you. If the sacrifice costs you nothing, it is not a proof, it is merely another gift. The target must see that you have placed their needs above your own safety, status, or comfort. Consider the historical archetype of the courtly lover or the devoted knight. Their power did not come from their poetry alone, but from their willingness to undertake dangerous quests or endure public humiliation for their lady. When you prove yourself, you are validating the target's vanity. You are telling them, through your actions, that they are worth any price. This is the ultimate flattery. The target feels a profound sense of obligation. They are now in your debt, and the only way to repay that debt is through total emotional surrender. You have moved from being a person they desire to a person they owe. To master the art of the proof, you must also be a master of the manufactured crisis. If a natural opportunity for heroism does not present itself, you may need to subtly orchestrate a situation where the target feels vulnerable or threatened, only to have you appear as their savior. This is a delicate and dangerous game. The crisis must appear entirely external to you, and your intervention must seem spontaneous and selfless. By resolving the tension you helped create, you bond the target to you with the strongest possible glue, the relief that follows a moment of genuine terror. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in its ability to ground the fantasy. Up to this point, the seduction has been a dream. The proof makes it a reality. It provides the evidence that the target's rational mind has been craving. Furthermore, a well-timed act of proof can wash away any previous mistakes or suspicions. If the target was beginning to think you were manipulative or cold, a sudden display of selfless devotion resets the emotional clock. They will rewrite their history with you, interpreting your past calculations as mere shyness or intensity in the light of your current heroism. Symbol: the shield. It is a heavy, functional object of wood and metal, bearing the scars of battle. It is not beautiful like a jewel or ethereal like a cloud, but in the moment of the strike, it is the only thing that matters. To hold the shield over another is to offer your own body as a barrier against the world. It is the silent, unyielding testimony of a protector who expects nothing in return but the safety of the one they guard. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of the overplayed hand. If your act of proof is too theatrical, or if you constantly remind the target of what you have sacrificed for them, you become a martyr rather than a hero. Guilt is a powerful motivator, but if it becomes too heavy, it turns into resentment. The target will feel burdened by your goodness and may seek to escape the debt by pushing you away. Additionally, if the proof is revealed to be a sham, if the target discovers that the crisis was your invention, the betrayal will be absolute. You will be seen as a predator rather than a savior. The proof must be executed with such conviction that even you begin to believe in your own heroism. It is the final, most dangerous bridge to cross. Once you have proven yourself, there is no turning back to the safety of the superficial. Chapter 17. Effect a regression. As a seduction reaches its peak, the target's adult identity, their logic, their social responsibilities, and their self-control remains the final obstacle to total surrender. To dissolve these remaining barriers, you must guide the target back to a state of psychological infancy. Every adult carries within them the memory of a time when they were entirely dependent, unconditionally loved, and free from the burdens of the ego. By mirroring the role of a parental figure or a childhood protector, you effect a regression. You tap into their earliest, deepest emotional patterns, making them feel a sense of safety and abandonment that they haven't experienced since youth. In this state, the target stops analyzing and starts reacting with the pure, uncritical devotion of a child. The parental mirror. The core of this maneuver is the manipulation of the unconscious memory. You are not asking the target to act like a child, you are creating an atmosphere that allows their inner child to emerge. This is achieved through a shift in your tone, your physical care, and your emotional intensity. You become the provider of limitless attention. By listening with an intensity that borders on the worshipful, or by taking care of their smallest physical needs, cooking for them, guiding them through a crowd, or offering a protective shoulder, you trigger the dormant feelings of being nurtured. Consider the power of infantile language. This doesn't mean baby talk, but rather the use of soft, repetitive, and rhythmic phrases. Use nicknames that only the two of you share. Speak in a low, soothing, melodic tone that bypasses the intellect. When a person feels taken care of in this specific, almost primal way, their adult defenses, cynicism, doubt, and social anxiety simply evaporate. They begin to associate you with the absolute security of their earliest years. You are no longer a lover they chose. You are a necessity they cannot live without. To master regression, you must also be able to play the rebellious youth. Sometimes, the regression is not toward the safety of the parent, but toward the freedom of the adolescent. By encouraging the target to break a small rule, to stay out too late, or to engage in a forbidden pleasure, you act as the playmate who leads them away from their boring adult lives. You provide the permission they never gave themselves. Whether you are the nurturing protector or the daring accomplice, the goal is the same: to move the target out of the rational present and into a sentimental past. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in the eroticization of dependency. In the modern world, we pride ourselves on independence, but secretly, the effort of being an adult is exhausting. By offering a reprieve from that exhaustion, you become an addictive presence. The target will find that when they are away from you, the world feels cold and demanding. They will yearn for the warmth of the regression you provide. Furthermore, regression allows for a deeper level of physical and emotional intimacy. When the target is in a regressed state, they are more susceptible to touch and more open to expressing their deepest, most irrational fears. You become their confessor, their guardian, and their source of joy. By anchoring your seduction in these foundational childhood emotions, you ensure that the bond is not just romantic but structural. It is built into the very basement of their personality. Symbol: the lullaby. It is a simple, repetitive melody, devoid of complex meaning or intellectual challenge. Its power lies in its rhythm and the warmth of the voice that carries it. It does not argue. It soothes. It promises that the world is safe, that the lights are low, and that you are not alone. It is the sound of the ego falling asleep. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of emotional suffocation. If the regression goes too far, the target may become too dependent, turning into a clinging vine that drains your energy and demands constant reassurance. You must maintain your own adult boundaries even while encouraging their regression. Additionally, if the target perceives that you are patronizing them or treating them like a child in a demeaning way, they will react with a sudden, fierce adult indignation. The regression must feel like a privilege, a secret escape that you both share, rather than a hierarchy you are imposing. If the parental mask slips to reveal a controlling or judgmental face, the target will snap out of the trance and see you as a threat to their autonomy. Chapter 18. Stir up the transgressive and taboo. In the polite world of social contracts and moral standards, we are taught to be good, to be civil, predictable, and restrained. Yet, beneath this veneer of respectability, the human psyche harbors a dark, persistent fascination with the forbidden. There is a specific, intoxicating heat that only exists at the edge of a boundary. The master of the seductive process knows that to truly bind a person to you, you must lead them away from the light of their common morality and into the shadows of the transgressive. By introducing a touch of the taboo, whether it is a social defiance, a sensory excess, or a psychological boundary crossing, you provide a thrill that no ordinary relationship can match. You become their partner in crime, and the shared sin creates a bond of complicity that is far stronger than any legal or social tie. The lure of the forbidden. The core of this maneuver is the eroticization of the illicit. Most people spend their lives following the rules, but they secretly resent the boredom that goodness brings. When you present yourself as someone who is unafraid of judgment, someone who lives by their own code, you become a magnetic figure. You are not just a lover, you are a liberator. You offer the target a rare opportunity to taste the fruit they've been told is poisonous, only to discover it is the most delicious thing they've ever known. Consider the power of the secret. A relationship that exists entirely in the public eye is subject to public scrutiny and social gravity. But a relationship that shares a transgressive secret, a hidden meeting place, a wicked shared habit, or a mutual defiance of a social authority creates a private universe. This shared transgression acts as a blood oath. The target feels that by joining you in this forbidden space, they have crossed a point of no return. They can no longer look at their respectable friends in the same way, because they now possess a dark, thrilling knowledge that the others lack. To master the transgressive, you must be a subtle guide, not a crude criminal. If you push the target too far, too fast, you will trigger their moral panic and cause them to flee in terror. Instead, you start with small infractions. A slightly scandalous joke, a late-night adventure in a dangerous part of town, or a suggestion that the two of you are above a specific petty social rule. You must frame the transgression as a sign of your shared superiority and your unique, untamable spirits. You are not being bad, you are being exceptional. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in the adrenaline of the edge. When a person does something they feel they shouldn't, their heart rate increases, their senses sharpen, and their focus narrows intensely on the person leading them. They misinterpret this physiological arousal as an overwhelming passion for you. By constantly keeping them near the boundary of the taboo, you keep them in a state of perpetual, high-voltage excitement. Furthermore, the transgressive allows for a breaking of the target's old identity. When someone commits a taboo act, they shatter the image they have of themselves as a perfect citizen. In that moment of identity fragmentation, you are there to provide a new, more exciting identity. You are the one who knows their true, dark self and accepts it, even celebrates it. This creates an absolute dog-like devotion. They feel they can never leave you because you are the only one who truly knows who they are behind the mask. Symbol, the snake in the garden. It does not use force, it uses a whisper. It points to the one thing that is off limits and suggests that the restriction is a lie told by the powerful to keep the spirit small. To eat the fruit is to gain knowledge, but it is also to be cast out. And in that exile, the only person left to turn to is the one who handed you the fruit. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of becoming truly repulsive. If the transgression you introduce is genuinely cruel, illegal, or disgusting to the target's core values, the seduction will end in a police report or a lifetime of trauma. You must know exactly where the target's hard moral lines are and play only with their soft social ones. Additionally, if you become too associated with the dark and the transgressive, the target may eventually seek the light of a stable, boring partner to escape the exhaustion of living on the edge. The taboo is a powerful drug, but like all drugs, it requires a come-down. You must balance your transgressive energy with moments of profound, grounding tenderness so the target doesn't feel they are losing their soul entirely. Chapter 19. Use physical lures. As the psychological walls have been dismantled through isolation, regression, and the transgressive, the target is now in a state of suspended animation. They are mentally yours, but the seduction remains incomplete as long as it stays purely in the realm of the mind. To move to the kill, you must shift the battlefield from the spirit to the senses. This chapter focuses on the transition from the cerebral to the carnal. You must overwhelm the target's remaining rational thoughts with a calculated sensory assault. By using physical lures, specific gestures, scents, movements, and environments, you trigger a biological response that bypasses the brain entirely. In this state of physical intoxication, the target loses the ability to say no because their body has already said yes. The sensory siege. The core of this maneuver is the paralysis of the intellect. When the senses are sufficiently stimulated, the blood retreats from the centers of logic and floods the centers of instinct. You are not looking for a conversation, you are looking for a trance. This is achieved by creating an atmosphere of heavy sensuality, low lighting, rhythmic music, or a scent that is subtle but pervasive. These elements act as a chemical cloak, wrapping the target in a feeling of warmth and safety that slowly dissolves their physical boundaries. Consider the power of the gaze and the touch. Throughout the earlier phases, your touch was accidental or fleeting. Now, it must become deliberate and lingering. You must master the seductive look, a gaze that is not aggressive but heavy-lidded and focused, suggesting a profound, wordless connection. When you touch the target, it should be in a way that suggests a claim, a marking of territory. You are no longer asking for permission, you are assuming it. This confidence is intoxicating. It relieves the target of the burden of making the first move, allowing them to remain the passive recipient of a force they can no longer resist. To master the physical lure, you must also utilize the language of the body. Slow down your movements. Speak in a lower, more breathy register. Mirror the target's breathing patterns until the two of you are inhaling and exhaling in a single shared rhythm. This biological mirroring creates a sense of oneness that is more powerful than any verbal declaration of love. You are creating a physical vacuum that the target feels an evolutionary compulsion to fill. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in the inevitability of the biological. While a person can argue with a thought or a sentiment, they cannot argue with a racing pulse or a sudden flush of the skin. By orchestrating these physical responses, you make the target feel that the seduction is a natural, irresistible force of nature. They don't feel conquered, they feel consumed. Furthermore, physical lures allow for the final lead astray. Once the target has surrendered physically, their mind will quickly follow to rationalize the act. They will convince themselves that the physical intimacy is proof of a grand, soul-deep connection. The kill is not the end of the seduction, but the final seal on the psychological trap you have been building since the first encounter. Symbol: the net. It is made of the finest, most delicate silk, almost invisible to the eye and soft to the touch. It does not feel like a cage as it falls. It feels like a caress. But as the victim moves, the silk tightens, and the more they struggle, the more entangled they become. It is a trap that uses the victim's own movements to secure their capture. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of appearing cheap or predatory. If the physical move is made too early, before the psychological ground has been prepared, it will be seen as a crude, unwanted advance. The kill must feel like the logical conclusion of a long, beautiful story, not a sudden, violent interruption. Additionally, if your physical lures are too practiced or theatrical, the target may sense the technique behind the touch. The physical must feel spontaneous, as if your desire for them has finally broken through your own self-control. If they suspect you are simply following a script, the physical intimacy will feel hollow and mechanical, and the enchantment will shatter at the very moment it was meant to be finalized. Chapter 20. Enter the spirit. Lead them into a state of surrender. The psychological siege is over and the physical lures have been cast. You have reached the critical juncture where the target's will is suspended, yet a final lingering spark of their ego remains. This chapter is about the final dissolution of the self. To complete the kill, you must stop being an external force and instead become an internal one. You must enter their spirit so completely that they can no longer distinguish between their own desires and the ones you have implanted. In this state of total surrender, the target does not feel conquered by a predator. They feel merged with a soulmate. They are no longer a victim of a seduction, but a willing participant in a shared destiny. The narcissistic mirror. The core of this maneuver is the absolute validation of the target's identity. Humans are profoundly lonely creatures, trapped within the prison of their own minds and rarely felt to be truly seen. By mirroring the target's moods, adopting their specific vocabulary, and reflecting their deepest, most cherished self-image back to them, you provide the ultimate psychological drug. You become the only person in the world who gets them. When they look at you, they see the best version of themselves. This is the surrender of the narcissist. They fall in love with you because you have become a perfect reflection of their own ego. Consider the power of shared vulnerability. At this stage, you must allow the target to believe they have broken your own defenses. By appearing to be overwhelmed by them, by showing a sudden, uncharacteristic loss of your legendary cool or your poetic distance, you grant them the ultimate triumph. They believe they have seduced you. This reversal is the final hook. People are most vulnerable when they feel they are the ones in control. By surrendering your power strategically, you invite them to surrender their soul. To master this state, you must also utilize rhythmic synchronization. This is the subtle art of matching the target's energy. If they are pensive, you become the silent companion. If they are exuberant, you become the enthusiastic witness. You must move in a synchronized dance where every gesture and word feels like a natural extension of their own thoughts. You are no longer persuading them. You are simply echoing the song they are already singing. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in the illusion of choice. The target must feel that their surrender is an act of free will, a natural overflowing of their own emotions. By entering their spirit, you remove the friction of the external world. There is no one to fight, no one to resist, and no logic to apply, because you are not an other. you are a part of them. Furthermore, this state of surrender creates a psychological amnesia. In the heat of this merging, the target forgets your past calculations, your triangles, and your strategic absences. All they know is the intense, overwhelming oneness of the present moment. You have successfully rewritten their reality, turning a tactical pursuit into a spiritual epiphany. Symbol: the mirror lake. Its surface is perfectly still, reflecting the sky and the trees with such absolute clarity that the traveler cannot tell where the world ends and the water begins. To step into the lake is to be enveloped by a reflection of everything you love until the coldness of the water is forgotten in the beauty of the image. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of losing yourself. If you enter the spirit too deeply without maintaining your own internal distance, you may find yourself genuinely seduced by your own victim. The master seducer must always remain the director, even when they are playing the role of the devoted lover. Additionally, if the target suddenly catches a glimpse of the actor behind the mirror, if you show a moment of genuine boredom or a flash of your true unmirrored self, the shock will be devastating. They will realize that the soulmate they loved was merely a mask, leading to a profound sense of violation and a desire for revenge. The surrender must be maintained with absolute consistency until the kill is fully finalized and the target is securely bound by the consequences of their choice. Chapter 21. Use the spiritual lure. In the final stages of the kill, there is a risk that the seduction may feel too heavy, too carnal, or too calculated. If the target begins to feel that the relationship is merely a physical or psychological game, they may experience a sudden sobering up, a return of their rational, moralistic self. To prevent this, you must elevate the seduction to a higher plane. You must spiritualize the experience. By framing your connection as something destined, transcendent, or even divine, you remove it from the realm of the mundane and the sinful. You are no longer two people engaged in a romantic pursuit. You are two souls fulfilling a cosmic alignment. In this state, the target's guilt is washed away, replaced by a sense of holy purpose. The sacred mask. The core of this maneuver is the alchemy of the sublime. You must utilize the language and symbols of religion and mysticism to describe your bond. Speak of epiphanies, soulmates, and sacred unions. This language bypasses the target's moral guard because it appeals to their highest aspirations rather than their lowest instincts. By treating the seduction as a spiritual journey, you grant the target permission to surrender completely. They are not falling for a seducer, they are rising to a higher state of being. Consider the power of the shared ritual. This could be a specific way you watch the sunrise, a private ceremony involving music or incense, or a recurring pilgrimage to a place of natural beauty. These rituals act as anchors for the spiritual illusion. They create a temple in time and space where the rules of the ordinary world do not apply. When the target is within this ritualistic space, they feel a sense of awe and reverence. This awe is easily transferred to you, the high priest or priestess of the experience. You are the one who has opened the door to the divine, and therefore, you are the one they must follow. To master the spiritual lure, you must also cultivate an aura of purity. This is the saintly mask. Even as you lead the target into the most intense physical or emotional territory, you must maintain a core of perceived innocence or higher purpose. You act as if the physical act is merely a sacrament, a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth. This prevents the target from feeling used or cheapened. Instead, they feel elevated and purified by your touch. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in the neutralization of guilt. Most people harbor a deep-seated fear of being judged for their desires. By spiritualizing the seduction, you provide a moral cloak. The target can tell themselves that their surrender is not a weakness of the flesh, but a strength of the spirit. This makes the seduction much harder to break. It is easy to walk away from a lover, but it is nearly impossible to walk away from a destiny. Furthermore, the spiritual lure creates a long-term bond. Physical passion eventually fades, but spiritual devotion can last a lifetime. By positioning yourself as a spiritual necessity, you ensure that the target will return to you whenever they feel the coldness or the emptiness of the mundane world. You have become their church, the place where they go to feel truly alive and connected to something greater than themselves. Symbol: the incense smoke. It rises from a physical coal, yet it is ethereal, fragrant, and upward-reaching. It fills the room, blurring the sharp edges of reality and creating a sense of sacred space. It is a bridge between the earth and the sky, turning a simple room into a cathedral and a simple encounter into a rite of passage. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of appearing holier-than-thou or hypocritical. If the target perceives that your spiritual language is a cynical cover for a purely physical agenda, the backlash will be violent. The sacred mask must be worn with absolute conviction. If you appear too earthly or greedy in the middle of a spiritual moment, the spell will shatter. Additionally, you must be careful not to trigger a religious conflict. If the target has a strong existing faith, trying to replace their religion with your own spiritual cult of personality may cause them to see you as a demonic influence. You must mirror their existing spiritual vocabulary and elevate it rather than trying to impose a new one. The goal is to make the seduction feel like the fulfillment of their spiritual journey, not a detour from it. Chapter 22. Render the physical blow. The psychological and spiritual traps have been set. The victim is isolated, and the tension has been wound to a breaking point. You have reached the final moment of the fourth phase, the physical culmination. If you have executed the previous chapters correctly, the target is in a state of exquisite torture. They are possessed by a desire that is both mental and physical, yet they are paralyzed by their own expectations or a lingering tiny shred of modesty. This chapter is about the bold, decisive move. You must cease the play and deliver the physical blow that shatters the last barrier. In this moment, you are no longer the elusive poet or the nurturing parent. You are the aggressor who claims what has already been surrendered in the spirit. The moment of release. The core of this maneuver is the calculated eruption. Throughout the seduction, you have been a master of self-control, leaking your desire only in small, controlled doses. Now you must appear to lose that control. This is the madness of the seducer. By acting with a sudden, forceful intensity, you provide the target with a crucial psychological out. If you are the one who initiates the final physical act with overwhelming passion, the target can tell themselves they were overpowered. This preserves their vanity. They didn't give in, they were taken. Consider the power of the sudden shift in temperature. If the atmosphere has been ethereal and spiritual, the physical blow must be earthy and direct. If you have been the passive mirror, you must suddenly become the active force. This contrast creates a sensory shock that paralyzes the target's ability to think. You move from the haze of words into the solidity of action. There should be no more room for hesitation, no more space for maybe. You create a now or never crossroads that forces the target to cross the final threshold. To master the physical blow, you must also be an expert in reading the breaking point. If you move too early, you are a brute. If you move too late, you are a bore. You must wait for the moment when the target's eyes are glazed, their breathing is shallow, and their body is physically leaning toward yours. In that split second of total vulnerability, you strike. The blow should feel like the breaking of a dam, a release of all the built-up tension of the previous days or weeks. Keys to seduction. The effectiveness of this chapter lies in the finality of the act. Once the physical threshold is crossed, the seduction is technically complete. The target has committed an act that they cannot undo. This creates a powerful post-rationalization. To justify their surrender, the target will elevate you even further in their mind. They will decide that this moment was the inevitable conclusion of a great love, rather than a well-executed strategy. Furthermore, the physical blow serves as the ultimate validation. By showing an uncontrollable desire for them, you offer the target the highest possible compliment. You are telling them that they are so irresistible that even a master of self-control like yourself has been reduced to a state of primal need. This feeds their ego at the very moment their body is being conquered, ensuring that their surrender is accompanied by a sense of immense personal power. Symbol: the thunderbolt. It is a sudden, violent discharge of energy that has been building in the clouds for hours. It illuminates the entire landscape in a single blinding flash, changing the atmosphere forever. It is unpredictable, irresistible, and leaves a permanent mark on the earth where it strikes. Reversal. The danger of this strategy is the risk of misreading the target's readiness. If you deliver the blow and the target recoils, the seduction is not just stalled, it is destroyed. You will be viewed as a harasser or a predator. You must be 100% certain that the target is begging for the move, even if they are doing so silently. Additionally, If the physical culmination is clumsy or disappointing, the poetic image you have built will collapse instantly. The target has been promised a transcendent experience. If the reality is mundane or awkward, they will feel cheated. The physical blow must match the quality of the psychological build-up. You must be as much of a star in the final act as you were in the opening scene, or the target will experience a buyer's remorse that turns their devotion into bitter resentment.